Welcome. Find yourself a comfortable position, let your breathing slow, and prepare to drift back through the centuries. Tonight, we journey to the Mediterranean world of the Ottoman Empire, to a time when great galleys cut through azure waters, their oars rising and falling in ancient rhythm. The story we explore tonight is not one of sultans and grand viziers alone, though they will appear. Rather, we begin at the very bottom of Ottoman naval power, in the dark belly of a war galley where human muscles propelled empires forward. We will witness the lives of men bound to oars, the clash of civilizations at the gates of Vienna, the mysterious workings of an empire that conscripted children to create elite warriors, and finally, the hidden world of palace women who shaped dynasties from behind silk curtains. These stories are distant now, separated from us by centuries and transformed worlds. Yet in their details, we find the persistent rhythms of human endurance, ambition, and survival. Let the past wash over you gently tonight. There is no urgency here, only the slow unfolding of lives lived long ago. We begin with the sea. Imagine yourself standing at the harbor of Algiers in the year 1580. The morning sun has barely crested the horizon, yet already the air carries the thick, salt-laden breath of the Mediterranean. Before you stretches a galley, one of dozens anchored in this bustling corsair port. The vessel is perhaps 150 feet long, sleek and low to the water, built for speed rather than comfort. Its single mast stands bare against the pale sky, waiting for wind that may or may not come. When wind fails, there are other means of propulsion. You descend the wooden gangway, your wrists already bound, joining a shuffling line of men whose fates mirror your own. Perhaps you were captured during a coastal raid on a Spanish village. Perhaps your merchant vessel was seized 3 days ago, and you watched helplessly as your former life disappeared over the horizon. Perhaps you are a prisoner of war, or a criminal sentenced to the galleys, or simply a man in the wrong place when corsairs came ashore. The path that brought you here matters little now. What matters is the bench awaiting you below deck. The descent into the galley's interior is a descent into permanent twilight. Wooden stairs, worn smooth by countless feet, lead down to the rowing deck. The ceiling is low, forcing taller men to stoop. The space between the rowing benches and the deck above allows perhaps 5 feet of clearance, no more. Light filters weakly through the gaps in the deck planking, creating thin shafts of gold that illuminate particles of dust and other things better left unexamined. You are assigned to a bench on the starboard side, roughly midship. This bench, like all the others stretching forward and aft, is occupied by 6 men. You become the 6th, the newest arrival, positioned at the innermost seat nearest the center gangway. A chain is produced, heavy iron links that have grown smooth with use and oxidation. This chain is passed through an iron ring bolted to the deck, then secured to the shackle already fastened around your ankle. The metal is cool against your skin now in these early morning hours. By midday, under the Mediterranean sun, it will burn. The bench itself is perhaps 18 inches wide, carved from a single length of oak that has darkened with age and absorbed decades of human sweat. It is angled slightly backward, allowing your body weight to assist in the pulling motion. Before you extends a massive oar, 30 feet of ash or pine, its leather-wrapped grip positioned at chest height. 5 other men share this oar with you, their hands finding familiar positions along its length. The man to your right, weathered and hollow-eyed, has been here 3 years. The man at the far end, by the hull, has pulled this same oar for nearly a decade. He no longer remembers his name from before. The rhythm of the galley is established by a man who stands on the elevated central walkway that runs the length of the vessel. He carries a drum, a simple but powerful instrument. When the drum sounds, you pull. When it sounds again, you push the oar forward, allowing its weight to carry it through the recovery. The rhythm is everything. It is the heartbeat of the ship, the organizing principle of your existence. In the beginning, those first hours and days, your body rebels. The pulling motion engages muscles you did not know existed. Your shoulders burn, your lower back seizes. The palms of your hands, soft from whatever life you led before, begin to blister within the first hour. By the end of the first day, those blisters have opened, weeping clear fluid that mingles with the sweat pouring down your arms. By the end of the first week, your hands are masses of raw, infected flesh that must nonetheless grip the oar when the drum commands. The drum commands often. A galley moves according to different speeds, each with its name and purpose. There is slow cruising pace, perhaps 20 strokes per minute, used for long voyages when speed is not essential. This pace is almost meditative, if one can find meditation in pain. Your breathing synchronizes with the pulls. The oar becomes an extension of your body, rising and falling with mechanical regularity. Your mind can wander after a fashion. You remember faces, places, the taste of food, the warmth of a bed. These memories are both comfort and torture. Then there is standard cruising speed, perhaps 25 to 30 strokes per minute. This is the pace of purposeful travel when a destination awaits and time matters. The increased tempo makes conversation impossible. Your breathing becomes labored. Sweat pours freely, running down your face, your back, pooling on the bench beneath you. There is no water to spare for washing. The salt in your sweat finds every cut, every blister, every abraded patch of skin. Battle speed approaches 40 strokes per minute or more. At this pace, the galley surges forward with startling velocity, its ram cutting through waves with purpose. At this pace, men die at their oars. Hearts simply stop. Lungs give out. Bodies pushed beyond their limits cease their function between one stroke and the next. The man beside you may pull one moment and slump forward the next, his weight suddenly dead on the oar, forcing the others to compensate. There is no time for removal during battle. He will remain chained there until the fighting concludes, his body swaying with each stroke, a memento mori in the most literal sense. The heat is relentless. The Mediterranean summer sun beats down on the deck above, turning the rowing chamber into an oven. The temperature rises to levels that would be considered intolerable anywhere else. Your skin is perpetually slick with moisture. Salt crusts form at your temples, in the creases of your elbows. Dehydration is constant. Water is provided, but sparingly. A ladle is passed down the benches twice daily, 3 times if the overseer is merciful or if the pace is particularly punishing. The water itself is stored in wooden casks that have absorbed the taste of previous contents and the flavor of the wood itself. It is warm, brackish, barely palatable. You drink gratefully. Food arrives once daily, occasionally twice. The meal consists of a gruel made from dried beans, perhaps some hardtack biscuit that must be soaked in liquid to become remotely chewable. Sometimes there is salted fish, though often it is half-spoiled. Protein is scarce and precious. The portions are calculated to provide just enough sustenance to keep a man pulling an oar. They are not calculated to satisfy hunger. You are always hungry. The gnawing emptiness in your belly becomes another constant companion, as familiar as the shackle around your ankle. Sleep is taken at the oar. When night falls and the galley anchors or continues under sail alone, you remain chained to your bench. There is no separate sleeping quarters, no hammock, no pallet. The bench is your bed. You lean back as far as the space allows, perhaps resting your head against the man behind you, who rests against the man behind him, creating a human chain of exhausted flesh. The bench is hard beneath your tailbone, your spine. Comfort is impossible. You sleep in fragments, waking repeatedly to shift position, to ease a cramped muscle, to scratch at the vermin that have made their homes in your clothing and hair. The smell is beyond description, yet must be described to understand the reality. Imagine the concentrated odor of unwashed human bodies, multiplied by dozens of men who have not bathed in weeks or months. Add to this the smell of human waste. There are no facilities below deck. Buckets are provided, positioned at intervals along the central walkway. They are emptied periodically, though not frequently enough. The contents splash and spill. Urine and worse seeps into the bilge water that sloshes in the bottom of the hull. This bilge water, mixing with seawater that inevitably leaks through the hull planking, creates a soup of filth that rises and falls with the ship's motion. On rough seas, it splashes onto the lower benches, soaking through clothing, mixing with the sweat and blood already present. The rats are numerous and bold. They venture forth after dark, knowing the chained men cannot pursue them. They scurry across legs, searching for crumbs of dropped food. Some men wake to find bites on their feet, small punctures that ooze and inevitably become infected. The rats also serve as a barometer. When disease spreads through the galley, the rats die first. You learn to watch the rats. Disease is the silent executioner. Typhus, dysentery, various fevers, they move through the cramped quarters with devastating efficiency. A man begins to shiver despite the heat. His skin takes on a greyish pallor. He continues to row, because the alternative is the whip, or worse. Eventually, he can no longer pull his portion of the oar's weight. The other men must compensate, cursing him weakly, though they know their own turn may come. He dies within days. His body is unchained and thrown overboard with minimal ceremony. Another man is brought down to take his place on the bench. The rhythm continues, unbroken. The psychological weight is perhaps heavier than the physical burden. There is the knowledge that this life may have no end point except death. Some galley slaves are sentenced to specific terms, 5 years, 10 years. But even these terms are theoretical. Courts and administrators are far away. Record-keeping is imperfect. Even if your term expires, who will notice? Who will insist on your release? The captain of the galley has no incentive to lose an experienced rower. You become aware that you may die here, chained to this bench, having pulled this oar until your body simply gives out. The mental defense mechanisms develop slowly. Some men retreat into themselves entirely, becoming hollow-eyed automatons who pull the oar but are no longer truly present. Others fixate on external markers. They count strokes, reaching impossibly high numbers, then beginning again. Some pray constantly, their lips moving in silent devotion to whatever god they knew before. The long-time survivors develop a kind of philosophical detachment. They describe watching their own suffering from outside themselves, as if it were happening to someone else. The man who taught you the rhythm explains this matter-of-factly. You are not here. This body pulls the oar, but you are somewhere else. Combat brings its own particular terror. When naval battle approaches, you hear the preparations above deck. Footsteps thunder on the planking. Weapons are distributed. Commands are shouted. The drum increases its tempo. You pull faster, knowing that your survival depends on the outcome of a battle you cannot see or influence. If your galley is victorious, you live to row another day. If it is defeated, you face several possibilities, none pleasant. You may sink. Mediterranean galleys, built for speed and shallow draft, are not particularly stable. A well-placed ram from an enemy galley can open a hull below the waterline. Water pours in with shocking speed. You are chained to a bench in a flooding vessel. The water rises to your knees, your waist, your chest. You pull against the shackle with all your remaining strength. Some shackles break, most do not. The water continues rising. The last moments are spent choking on seawater in pitch darkness. The screams of other men echoing in the confined space. Fire is equally terrifying. Naval warfare of this period employs incendiary weapons, pitch, Greek fire, burning projectiles. If your galley catches fire, the flames spread quickly across the tarred wood and canvas. Smoke fills the rowing deck. You cannot escape. You can only pull frantically at your chains while the heat builds and the flames descend. If your galley is captured, you face the prospect of merely changing masters. Pirates, corsairs, and naval forces of various nations all employ galley slaves. Being captured means being assessed by a new owner, possibly transferred to a different vessel, possibly sold at market. The chain changes hands, but remains around your ankle. There are stories, rare and precious, of liberation. Sometimes a galley is captured by forces who free the slaves. Christian galleys occasionally release Christian slaves found on Ottoman or corsair vessels, though they often replace them with Muslim captives. Occasionally, a wealthy family learns of a relative's enslavement and arranges ransom. The Trinitarian Order and the Mercedarians dedicate themselves to ransoming Christian slaves, raising funds through Europe to purchase freedom. But these redemptions are rare. For every man ransomed, thousands remain chained. Escape is nearly impossible, but perpetually contemplated. When the galley makes port, you remain chained. When it anchors off a coast, guards are posted. The few who manage to break their shackles face the challenge of swimming to shore, a feat requiring strength that most galley slaves no longer possess. Even reaching shore presents new dangers. You are in foreign territory, possibly hostile, without money or documents, your body branded or mutilated in ways that mark you as an escaped slave. Yet occasionally, escape succeeds. A coastal raid gone wrong leaves guards distracted. A storm drives the galley near shore. A sympathetic crew member looks away at the right moment. These stories circulate in whispers during the night, keeping alive the faint ember of possibility. The man 3 benches forward once knew someone who escaped in Sicily and made it to a monastery. Whether this is truth or comforting fiction no longer matters. The story itself provides a reason to endure another day. The rare moments of respite are treasured beyond measure. When the galley is becalmed for days, when wind and oars are both useless against contrary currents, the rowing ceases. You remain chained, but the oar is still. Your body begins to recover slightly. Blisters scab over, muscles repair themselves marginally. The constant strain on your lower back eases fractionally. These interludes never last long enough. The wind eventually shifts, or orders come to make way, and the drum resumes its command. Some rowers develop a kind of expertise, a terrible skill in their bondage. They learn to read the ship's movements, to anticipate when increased speed will be demanded, to pace themselves for long hauls. They learn which overseers are cruel and which are merely indifferent. They learn which positions on the bench are marginally less awful. The outer positions, nearest the hull, receive slightly better air circulation through the oar ports, though they also take spray in rough seas. This knowledge is a bitter currency, earned through suffering and shared in grudging whispers. The hierarchy among the enslaved is minimal but present. Those who have survived longest possess a grim authority. New arrivals defer to them, seeking advice on how to survive the first weeks. Religious and ethnic divisions occasionally surface. Christians and Muslims, Spaniards and Greeks, slaves and criminals, but shared suffering tends to erode these distinctions. At the oar, you are all equally bound. Your theological differences matter little to the drum. Occasionally, very occasionally, there are moments of strange beauty that penetrate even this hell. A sunset viewed through the oar port, setting the Mediterranean ablaze with copper and gold. The rhythmic splash of oars creating a kind of hypnotic pattern. The rare distribution of wine instead of water, a swallow of rough vintage that briefly warms the belly and dulls the pain. These moments do not redeem the suffering. They merely punctuate it, offering the briefest reminder that a world exists beyond chains and oars. The galley slave's life is measured in strokes of the oar, thousands per day, millions over years, each one identical to the last and the next. It is a life of monotony interrupted by terror, of constant discomfort occasionally spiking into agony, of dim hopes gradually fading into numb acceptance. It is life reduced to its most basic elements. Pull the oar, take breath, survive until the next stroke. The rhythm becomes everything. The rhythm is eternal. And yet men endured it. Not by choice, but they endured. They found ways to preserve some fragment of themselves, some memory of who they were before the chain. They counted days, told stories, made bitter jokes. They survived not because the human spirit is unconquerable, many spirits were conquered utterly, but because the alternative was death. And even in the worst circumstances, life clings stubbornly to life. The galleys continued plying Mediterranean waters for centuries, their crews of enslaved men providing the engine of naval warfare and trade. Only gradually, as sailing technology improved and moral attitudes shifted, did this practice decline. But in its time, it was simply how things were done. The galley slaves were seen as instruments, tools no more worthy of consideration than the oar itself. Their suffering was noted, if at all, as an unfortunate necessity of maritime power. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can take comfort in the vast distance between that world and yours. The Mediterranean still sparkles under the sun, but the galleys are gone. The chains have rusted away. The rhythm of the drum has faded into history. You rest in comfort they could not imagine, free in ways they could not conceive. Let their distant suffering remind you of the relative mercy of your own era, and let that knowledge ease you gently into sleep. We leave behind now the Mediterranean galleys and their human cargo, moving northward and forward in time to the summer of 1683. The Ottoman Empire, which employed those galleys, reached its greatest territorial extent in this period. Its lands stretched from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna, from the Crimea to the coasts of North Africa. And it was at Vienna that this expansion would finally meet its limit. Picture the Danube River Valley in early July, the landscape green with summer growth, wheat fields ripening under the sun. Into this pastoral scene came an army of unprecedented size. Contemporary estimates vary wildly. Some claimed 300,000 men, though modern historians suggest perhaps half that number. Even so, it was a host that darkened the roads for miles, a moving city of soldiers, camp followers, siege engineers, and artillery. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha commanded this enormous force. He was the second most powerful man in the Ottoman Empire, subordinate only to Sultan Mehmed IV himself. The Sultan had chosen to remain at Belgrade, hunting, while his Grand Vizier prosecuted the war. This campaign represented the culmination of years of planning and the resumption of Ottoman expansion into the heart of Europe. Vienna had been besieged once before, in 1529, and had held. Now, a century and a half later, the attempt would be made again. The army that approached Vienna was a cosmopolitan force, reflecting the empire's vast reach. There were Janissaries, those elite infantry we will examine more closely later, their distinctive white felt caps marking them as the Sultan's household troops. There were Sipahis, the feudal cavalry drawn from military landholders across Anatolia and the Balkans. There were irregular forces, Tatars from the Crimea, renowned for their horsemanship and their ruthless raiding tactics. There were detachments from vassal states, troops from Moldavia and Wallachia, Transylvanian contingents. The siege train included hundreds of artillery pieces, from massive bronze cannons capable of hurling stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds, to smaller field pieces, to mortars designed for high-angle fire. Behind the fighting men came the infrastructure of a mobile city, supply wagons stretched for miles, carrying food, ammunition, spare weapons, tools. There were armorers and blacksmiths, carpenters and engineers, physicians and religious officials. There were merchants hoping to profit from the campaign. There were families, the wives and children of soldiers, following the army as they had done for generations. The Ottoman military system did not maintain the strict separation between military and civilian that European armies attempted. It was a society on the move, complete and self-sufficient. Vienna received warning of the approaching host. Emperor Leopold I and his court fled westward, leaving the defense to Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, an experienced military commander. The city's garrison numbered perhaps 15,000 men, a respectable force, but woefully inadequate to man the extensive fortifications against an enemy 10 times their number. Starhemberg's strategy was simple by necessity: hold the walls, conserve resources, and pray that relief would arrive before the city fell. The fortifications of Vienna had been modernized in the preceding decades according to the latest principles of military engineering. The medieval walls had been replaced with a system of bastions and ravelins, lower and thicker than old-style walls, designed to withstand artillery bombardment and provide overlapping fields of fire. The walls were perhaps 40 feet thick at their base, sloping inward as they rose. Moats, some filled with water, surrounded the fortifications. Beyond the moats lay a glacis, an open killing ground cleared of buildings and vegetation. The Ottoman army arrived before the walls on July 14th. For the defenders watching from the ramparts, it must have been an awesome and terrible sight. The plain around the city disappeared beneath a sea of tents. The Janissaries established their camp directly before the most vulnerable section of wall, between the Burg Bastion and the Löbel Bastion. The Grand Vizier's own elaborate tent complex rose like a palace of silk and canvas, its opulence a deliberate display of confidence and power. The siege began not with a general assault, but with the methodical work of investment. Ottoman engineers surveyed the defences, identifying the optimal locations for artillery batteries and mining operations. Gabions, wicker baskets filled with earth, were positioned to provide cover for the gun crews. Parallels, trenches running parallel to the walls, were dug at progressively closer intervals, each one providing a new base for advancing the siege works. The defenders watched this preparation with growing dread, knowing each completed trench brought the attackers one step closer. The bombardment began on a scale Vienna had never experienced. The Ottoman artillery fired day and night, the thunder of guns becoming the constant background noise of existence within the city. Stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds struck the fortifications with tremendous force, pulverizing the outer layer of stone and earth. The walls, despite their thickness, began to show damage. Crenellations were knocked away, sections of parapet crumbled. The defenders worked frantically to repair each night what the bombardment destroyed each day, hauling earth and stone to patch the breaches, knowing their labor was temporary. Simultaneously, the most insidious form of siege warfare began beneath the ground. Ottoman miners began digging tunnels toward the walls, working in shifts, excavating by candlelight in cramped airless tunnels that might collapse at any moment. The goal was to dig beneath the fortifications, place explosive charges, and blow gaps in the walls. The countermining efforts by the defenders involved digging their own tunnels, listening for the sound of enemy digging, attempting to intercept the Ottoman tunnels before they reached their targets. This underground war was conducted in near total darkness. Men worked with picks and shovels in spaces barely large enough to move, the air thick with dust and the smell of disturbed earth. When enemy tunnels intersected, close quarters combat erupted in the confined spaces. Desperate struggles with knives and short swords, bodies pressed together in blackness, the only light from guttering candles that might be knocked over and extinguished, plunging the fighters into complete dark. Several times, Ottoman mines reached their targets. The explosions were terrifying, the ground shaking, sections of wall erupting upward in fountains of stone and earth, the blast echoing across the city. Each successful mine created a breach, a gap in the defenses that had to be immediately filled. The defenders rushed to the openings with palisades, with gabions filled with earth, with anything that might slow an assault. They knew that if the Ottomans attacked through a breach in force, the city would likely fall. Inside Vienna, conditions deteriorated steadily. The city had stockpiled food, but the siege dragged on week after week. Rations were reduced, then reduced again. Bread became coarse, made from flour mixed with sawdust to stretch the grain supply. Meat disappeared except for horses, and then even horses became precious. Stray dogs and cats vanished from the streets. The wealthy could still purchase food at inflated prices from hoarded stocks. But the common people faced genuine hunger. Children cried with empty bellies. The elderly grew weaker. Disease followed hunger as it always did. In the crowded conditions of a besieged city, with sanitation systems overwhelmed, dysentery spread rapidly. Typhus appeared, carried by lice that thrived in unwashed bodies and clothing. The hospitals filled beyond capacity. Physicians worked themselves to exhaustion, treating an endless stream of wounded soldiers and sick civilians. The burial details worked day and night, interring bodies in mass graves when individual graves became impractical. The constant bombardment took its psychological toll. There was no safe place in the city. Artillery balls did not discriminate between military and civilian targets. They struck houses, churches, markets. Buildings collapsed, crushing families in their sleep. A woman drawing water might be killed by a falling shell fragment. Children playing in a courtyard might die in an instant. The randomness of it wore on minds and spirits. People flinched at sudden sounds. Sleep became difficult, then impossible for many. Exhaustion compounded fear, compounded hunger, creating a population on the edge of collapse. Count von Starhemberg maintained discipline through force of will and the knowledge that surrender meant almost certain sack and enslavement. He was everywhere, on the walls encouraging the defenders, in the breaches directing repairs, in the tunnels checking the counter-mining efforts. His presence steadied men who might otherwise have broken. But even he understood that time was running out. The walls were crumbling section by section. Supplies were nearly exhausted. The garrison was reduced by casualties and disease. Relief had to come soon, or it would come too late. Beyond Vienna, Europe watched with anxious attention. Pope Innocent V worked frantically to organize a relief force, using his diplomatic influence and promising funds from church treasuries. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold called upon his vassals and allies. Letters and messengers crossed Europe, but assembling an army took time. Troops had to be gathered, supplied, organized. Every day of delay was another day Vienna weakened. The relief force finally coalesced in August under the command of Charles V, Duke of Lorraine. His force was substantial, but still outnumbered by the Ottoman army. The critical addition came from Poland. King Jan III Sobieski led the largest Polish contingent, including the famous Polish winged hussars, elite heavy cavalry whose appearance was as impressive as their combat effectiveness. The relief army, totaling perhaps 70,000 men, began moving toward Vienna in early September. The Grand Vizier received reports of the approaching relief force, but chose to continue the siege rather than turn to meet the threat. This decision has puzzled historians. Perhaps he believed the siege was too advanced to abandon. Perhaps he underestimated the relief force's strength. Perhaps he overestimated his own army's ability to fight on two fronts. Whatever his reasoning, it proved disastrous. On September 11th, the relief army reached the Kahlenberg Heights overlooking Vienna from the west. From this elevated position, they could see the entire tableau below. The battered city, the surrounding Ottoman camps, the siege works stretching like webs across the plain. Plans were made for the following day. The Polish forces would take the right wing, the Imperial forces the left. The attack would begin at dawn. September 12, 1683, dawned clear and bright. In Vienna, the defenders on the walls saw the relief army beginning its descent from the heights. Hope, long suppressed, surged through the exhausted garrison. The civilians, even those near starvation, crowded into churches to pray. Outside the walls, the Ottoman forces prepared to meet the attack while maintaining the siege, an impossible task that would split their strength fatally. The battle developed through the morning and into the afternoon. The Imperial forces engaged the Ottoman left, the fighting seesawing across the broken ground. The Ottoman forces fought stubbornly, their Janissaries in particular showing the discipline and skill that had made them feared throughout Europe. But they were caught in an untenable position, unable to fully commit to either the siege or the field battle. Meanwhile, King Sobieski led his Polish forces around the Ottoman right flank. The terrain was difficult, the advance slower than desired. Ottoman Tatar cavalry harassed the movement. By early afternoon, the Polish forces had not yet made their decisive contribution, and the outcome remained uncertain. Then in mid-afternoon, the ground finally leveled enough for cavalry action. Sobieski ordered his cavalry to form up, the winged hussars in their gleaming armor, their wooden wing frames creating a distinctive appearance, the lances forming a forest of points. Behind them, additional cavalry units prepared to follow the initial charge. It was the largest cavalry charge of the 17th century, perhaps 18,000 horsemen preparing to launch themselves at the Ottoman lines. The charge, when it came, was devastating. The massed cavalry descended the slope at gathering speed, the ground trembling beneath thousands of hooves. The Ottoman forces, already hard-pressed, could not withstand the shock. Their lines bent, then broke. Panic spread through the camp. The Grand Vizier attempted to rally his forces, but the momentum was irreversible. The Ottoman army began a general retreat that quickly became a rout. The defenders of Vienna, seeing the Ottoman lines collapsing, sallied forth from the gates. Exhausted as they were, they joined the pursuit, settling scores for 2 months of suffering. The Ottoman camp was overrun. The Grand Vizier's splendid tent complex, filled with treasures and supplies, was captured intact. Sobieski would later write to his wife from that captured tent, describing the richness of the furnishings and the completeness of the victory. The Ottoman army retreated southward in disorder. Thousands were killed in the pursuit. Thousands more died of hunger and exposure during the disorganized withdrawal. The Grand Vizier managed to rally remnants of his force and conducted a fighting retreat, but his reputation was destroyed. He would be executed the following year, strangled with a silk cord in the traditional Ottoman manner, blamed for the disaster at Vienna. The victory's implications rippled across Europe and the Ottoman Empire. For Europe, it marked a definitive turning point. The Ottoman threat to Central Europe, which had loomed for centuries, was broken. In the decades following Vienna, the Habsburgs would gradually push Ottoman forces back through Hungary. The frontier that had been contested for generations would shift decisively in favor of Christian Europe. For the Ottoman Empire, Vienna represented the beginning of a long, slow decline. The empire would persist for another 2.5 centuries, but it would never again expand into Europe as it had before. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded Ottoman arms was shattered. Internally, the failure prompted questions about military reform and modernization that would preoccupy Ottoman statesmen for generations. The siege also had cultural impacts that persisted in unexpected ways. Legend holds that fleeing Ottoman forces abandoned sacks of coffee beans, which Viennese entrepreneurs used to establish the city's famous coffee house culture. Whether strictly historical or not, the story reflects how even warfare's aftermath can seed cultural transformations. As you lie comfortable tonight, consider those 2 months in 1683, when Vienna teetered on the edge of conquest. The civilians enduring bombardment and hunger, not knowing if relief would come, the soldiers manning crumbling walls, their numbers dwindling daily. The Ottoman forces, confident at first, gradually realizing their campaign was failing. All of them caught in the machinery of early modern warfare, where individual lives meant little against strategic imperatives. The siege is ended now, centuries past. The walls of Vienna have long since been replaced by boulevards. The killing grounds are parks where children play. The trenches and mines have been filled in and forgotten. Only in histories and quiet nights like this Do we remember the desperate summer of 1683, when Europe's future hung in the balance before Vienna's battered walls? Let that distant crisis fade now as you prepare for sleep. The armies have marched away. The cannons are silent. The cavalry charges only in memory. Rest now in the peace that those long-ago warriors won, and know that their struggles are done. From the chaos of siege warfare, we turn now to something more mysterious, more complex. A system that created warriors from captives, an institution that transformed Christian boys into the Ottoman Empire's most formidable soldiers. This is the story of the Devshirme, the child levy, and the Janissaries who emerged from it. To understand this system, we must first set aside modern sensibilities and enter the logic of an early modern empire. The Ottoman state, like all great empires, faced a fundamental problem: how to create a loyal military and administrative class that owed allegiance to the Sultan alone, uncorrupted by tribal loyalties or aristocratic ambitions. The solution they developed was unprecedented and, by the standards of its time, remarkably effective. Imagine a village in the Balkans in the year 1550. It might be in Serbia or Bulgaria or Greece, any of the Christian lands under Ottoman control. The village is small, perhaps 200 souls, centered around a church and a communal well. The people are peasants, farmers who work land they do not own, paying taxes to Ottoman administrators and tithes to their priest. Their lives follow the rhythm of planting and harvest, of saints' days and fasts, patterns unchanged for generations. Then word arrives that the officials are coming. The Devshirme recruitment is being conducted this year, and this district has been selected. The news spreads through whispers, and parents feel a cold dread settle in their stomachs. They know what this means. The recruitment party arrives within a week. It consists of several Ottoman officials, including a Janissary officer who once was himself taken in a previous levy, and local intermediaries who know the villages and can identify families. They set up at the church or the village square, and the summons goes out. All Christian families with sons between the ages of 8 and 18 must present them for inspection. The boys are lined up, nervous and confused. The younger ones do not fully understand what is happening. The older ones have heard stories and stand rigid with fear, or, occasionally, with a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. The officials move down the line, examining each boy with practiced eyes. They are looking for specific qualities: health, intelligence, physical potential. Boys who are too small or too weak are passed over. Only children are considered, never the firstborn son, as Ottoman law exempts him to preserve the family line. Boys from cities are generally excluded. The preference is for rural children, considered less corrupted and more malleable. The selection is both random and deliberate. There are quotas to fill, but also standards to maintain. Perhaps 3 boys from this village are chosen, perhaps none, perhaps 5. The selected boys are marked down in a register, their names recorded in Ottoman script, alongside their place of origin. Their parents are given a receipt, a piece of paper that seems a cruel mockery, documenting that their son has been taken into the Sultan's service. The partings are wrenching, though they must be brief. Mothers clutch at sons they may never see again. Fathers stand rigid, trying to show strength while everything inside them crumbles. The boys themselves react variously. Some cry, some stand numbly, some try to run and must be gently but firmly restrained. The younger ones do not fully grasp that they are leaving forever. The older ones understand all too well. The selected boys are gathered together from multiple villages, forming groups of 50 or more. They begin a journey that will take weeks or months, depending on their starting point. They walk because the empire does not waste resources transporting mere recruits. The journey itself becomes the first stage of their transformation. They are removed from everything familiar: language, religion, family, home. Each step takes them further into a world they do not understand. The guards are not cruel by the standards of the era. These boys are valuable, potential investments in the Sultan's future. They are fed adequately, allowed to rest, given basic medical care if they fall ill. But they are also firmly controlled. Escape is nearly impossible. They are in foreign territory, speak Ottoman Turkish poorly if at all, and have no money or resources. Where would they even go? Along the way, the older boys begin to understand the opportunity hidden within their captivity. The guards and officials drop hints, explain the system. These boys, if they prove capable, might rise to extraordinary heights. The Grand Vizier himself was once a Christian boy taken in the Devshirme. So were countless provincial governors, military commanders, and wealthy administrators. The Ottoman system, uniquely among empires of its time, allows slaves to reach the highest positions of power. This knowledge plants a seed. Perhaps this fate, though terrifying, is not entirely without possibility. They reach Istanbul after weeks of travel, their first glimpse of the imperial capital overwhelming their provincial senses. The city is vast beyond comprehension, sprawling across hills and shores, the great dome of Hagia Sophia dominating the skyline, minarets rising in multitudes, the Sea of Marmara glittering beyond. They are taken to training facilities, sorted again, evaluated more thoroughly. The conversion process begins immediately. It is not presented as optional. An imam instructs them in the basics of Islam, the declaration of faith, the 5 pillars, essential prayers. They are circumcised, a painful and frightening procedure for boys who have reached adolescence. They are given new names, Turkish names, severing another link to their past. The boy who was Dimitri becomes Mehmed, Stefan becomes Hassan, Georgi becomes Suleiman. Their old names are not forbidden exactly, but are simply no longer used, gradually fading from memory. The theological instruction is basic but constant. They learn Arabic prayers phonetically, understanding coming later. They learn to perform the ritual ablutions, to pray 5 times daily, to observe the fasts. For boys raised in Orthodox Christianity, with its icons and incense and elaborate liturgies, Islam's stark simplicity is jarring. But children are adaptable. Gradually, the new faith becomes familiar, then normal, then their own. The most promising boys, perhaps 1 in 20, are selected for the palace schools, where they will be trained as administrators and scholars. The rest enter the Janissary training system, a rigorous program designed to produce elite soldiers. This training takes years and encompasses far more than mere military drill. The Asemi-Olana, the novice youths, are first sent to Anatolia, where they spend years performing agricultural labor for Turkish families. This serves multiple purposes. It teaches them the Turkish language through immersion. It hardens their bodies with physical work. It indoctrinates them into Turkish culture and customs, and it removes them from the temptations and distractions of Istanbul, allowing them to mature in a controlled environment. The work is genuine labor. Plowing fields, tending livestock, harvesting crops. The families they live with are generally kind, within the bounds of the relationship. These are not their adopted families, but neither are they cruel masters. The boys learn the rhythms of Turkish rural life. The language becomes fluent. The prayers become habitual. By the time they return to Istanbul for military training, they are no longer entirely the Christian peasant boys who were taken. They have become something else, something in between. Military training begins in earnest when they return to the capital as young men. The training is comprehensive and demanding. They learn archery, and the Ottoman composite bow is not easily mastered. It requires tremendous upper body strength and years of practice to achieve accuracy. They learn sword fighting, both with the kilij, the curved Ottoman saber, and with various other bladed weapons. They learn wrestling, the traditional Turkish sport that builds strength and agility. They learn to march in formation, to execute complex maneuvers, to operate firearms as these weapons become more common. But the training extends beyond martial skills. They learn literacy in Turkish and often Arabic and Persian as well. They learn mathematics, necessary for siege warfare and artillery calculations. They learn music, the Janissary bands, with their distinctive instrumentation of drums, cymbals and zurna pipes, are famous throughout Europe and feared for the psychological impact of their martial rhythm. They learn the intricate protocols of Ottoman court life, the proper forms of address, the etiquette of the divan. The Janissaries are organized into ortas, companies of roughly 100 men, each with its own specialty and tradition. Some ortas specialize in musketry, others in archery, others in engineering or artillery. Each orta has its distinctive insignia and internal hierarchy. The orta becomes a new family, more real in some ways than the biological families the men barely remember. Loyalty to one's orta brothers is fierce and absolute. Their barracks become permanent homes. The Janissaries are forbidden to marry during active service, a rule designed to ensure their loyalty remains undivided. Some rules relax over time, particularly in provincial garrisons, but in principle, the Janissary owes allegiance only to the Sultan and his brothers in the corps. This creates a unique social structure, a military monastic order in effect, bound by discipline and shared identity. The privileges they enjoy are substantial. They receive regular salaries paid directly from the imperial treasury, making them perhaps the first standing professional army in European history. They receive rations and equipment. They are exempt from many taxes. In Istanbul, they hold a privileged legal position. Civilians defer to them. Disputes are settled in their favor. When a new sultan accedes to the throne, he traditionally increases their pay in a generous donative, buying their loyalty with gold. In return, they are expected to be the elite of the Ottoman military. In battle, the Janissaries are deployed at critical points, storming breaches, holding key positions, providing disciplined firepower. Their presence on a battlefield is worth thousands of irregular troops. They are the Sultan's ultimate military asset, the guarantee of his power. But this power creates its own problems. The Janissaries, over time, become aware of their importance. They realize that the Sultan needs them more than they need the Sultan. This realization breeds arrogance first, then political consciousness, then outright political power. The most dramatic rebellions involve outright massacres. When Sultan Osman II attempted to reform the corps in 1622, the Janissaries stormed the palace, seized the 19-year-old Sultan, and executed him in the dungeons of the Seven Towers fortress. When Sultan Ibrahim attempted to assert control in 1648, he too was deposed and executed. The pattern became established. Sultans who challenged the Janissaries paid with their thrones or their lives. Yet for all their political power and military pride, the Janissaries remain, in a profound sense, slaves. They are kul, servants of the Sultan, legally his property. This paradox lies at the heart of the Ottoman system. The most powerful men in the empire, save the Sultan himself, are technically slaves. They can be elevated to the Grand Vizierate, commanding armies and administering provinces, yet they own nothing in their own right. All their wealth, all their power, derives from the Sultan's favor and can be revoked at his command. The controversy surrounding the Devshirme system is evident even to contemporary observers. Christian communities in the Balkans develop strategies to protect their sons, bribing officials, hiding boys when the levy comes, deliberately injuring them to make them unsuitable for selection. Parents experience the collection as a profound trauma, a theft of their children sanctioned by state power. Yet some families over time come to see it differently. They recognize that a son taken into Ottoman service might rise to heights impossible in his native village. He might become wealthy, powerful, even return to govern the province of his birth. Some families begin volunteering their sons, hoping to gain advantage through these connections. The system's cruelty and its opportunity become inextricably mixed. For the boys themselves, the experience varies dramatically. Some never reconcile with their fate, serving with sullen resentment until death releases them. Others embrace their new identity so completely that their Christian origins become mere biographical footnotes. Many exist in a middle ground, retaining some memory of who they were while becoming who they are required to be. There are documented cases of Janissaries who, late in life, attempt to reconnect with their origins. A few manage to discover their birth villages, though often everyone who knew them has died. They are strangers twice over, alien to the Christian villages they left and never entirely comfortable in the Muslim world they joined. These men carry within themselves the contradictions of the empire that created them. The military effectiveness of the Janissaries declines over the 17th and 18th centuries. As they gain the right to marry and pass positions to sons, the rigorous selection and training erodes. Men enter the corps through family connection rather than merit. The numbers swell with hangers-on and dependents. What was once a lean, disciplined force becomes bloated and inefficient. Their resistance to military reform means Ottoman armies increasingly lag behind European forces in training and tactics. By the early 19th century, the Janissaries are less an asset than a liability. They resist every attempt at modernization, viewing any change as a threat to their privileges. Sultan Mahmud II, determined to reform the military, begins secretly raising a new force trained in European methods. In 1826, when the Janissaries rebel yet again, the Sultan is ready. Artillery positions have been prepared. The new troops surround the Janissary barracks. What follows is not a battle but a massacre. Thousands of Janissaries are killed in their barracks or hunted through the streets. The survivors are executed or exiled. The corps that had existed for nearly 500 years is abolished in a single bloody day. The historical judgment on the Devshirme and the Janissaries remains complex. From one perspective, it was a system of slavery and forced conversion, a traumatic separation of children from families, a violation of human rights by any modern standard. From another perspective, it was a path to social mobility unmatched in contemporary Europe, where birth determined destiny. Christian peasant boys could become the second most powerful person in a vast empire, something impossible in Christian Europe, where aristocratic birth mattered above all. Perhaps both judgments are true. Perhaps the system's cruelty and its progressive elements existed simultaneously, inseparable. The boys taken in the Devshirme paid a terrible price in lost families and forced conversion. Some found opportunities they never would have known in their villages. Many found only hardship and early death. The system succeeded brilliantly for centuries, then failed catastrophically, leaving as its legacy questions we still ponder about power, identity, and the malleability of human beings. As you drift towards sleep now, consider those boys taken from Balkan villages, transformed into Ottoman soldiers, their lives redirected by empire's needs. Consider the strange destiny that turned peasant children into palace guards, Christian boys into Muslim warriors. Their story is one of coercion and opportunity, trauma and adaptation, loyalty and rebellion, all the contradictions the human experience contains, concentrated in a single remarkable institution. Let the Janissaries rest now. Their barracks are empty, their kettles cold, their distinctive white caps stored only in museums. The boys they once were, and the men they became, have all long since turned to dust. Only in histories and quiet meditations like this do they march again, ghosts of an empire that shaped them absolutely and was itself shaped by what they became. We turn now from the world of military force to the realm of subtle power, from the barracks of warriors to the secluded chambers where women shape dynasties through influence rather than command. We enter the harem of Topkapi Palace, perhaps the most misunderstood institution in Ottoman history. The word harem itself comes from the Arabic harim, meaning forbidden or sacred. It designates the private family quarters of a household, the spaces where women lived separate from the public, male world. In the case of the Ottoman Sultan's harem, this separation took on monumental proportions, creating a world unto itself, hidden behind walls and guarded by eunuchs, a place of both confinement and extraordinary privilege. Imagine approaching the harem from the third court of Topkapi Palace in the year 1600, during the reign of Sultan Mehmed III. You are an outsider, a rare visitor granted exceptional access. Before you stands an imposing gate, the carriage gate, flanked by guards. Only certain people may pass through this threshold: eunuchs, palace officials with specific business, and the Sultan himself. Women enter, but rarely leave. What lies beyond is a mystery to most of the world. Passing through the gate, you enter a complex of over 300 rooms, courtyards, baths, and corridors spread across multiple buildings. The architecture speaks of wealth and refinement. The walls are covered with Iznik tiles in blues and greens, intricate geometric patterns interspersed with floral motifs, tulips, carnations, roses. The woodwork is elaborate, cedar wood carved with arabesques and inlaid with mother of pearl. Fountains murmur in courtyards, their sound designed to mask conversations, to provide privacy even in shared spaces. Light filters through latticed windows, creating patterns that shift as the sun moves across the sky. The first impression is one of quietness, not silence. There are always sounds, whispered conversations, the rustle of silk, distant laughter, footsteps on marble, but a hushed quality, as if the outside world's noise cannot penetrate here. The air carries the scent of rosewater, amber, musk. These perfumes are not cheap or common. They are luxuries that mark this as a space of refinement. The harem houses perhaps 1,000 women at its peak. Though numbers fluctuate over the centuries, these women come from diverse origins. Some are slaves captured in warfare or purchased from markets across the empire. Others are gifts from provincial governors seeking favor. Some are daughters of Christian nobility from the Caucasus, Circassian, Georgian, or Abkhazian families who send their daughters to the imperial court, hoping they might bear a prince and elevate their house. Beauty is valued certainly, but intelligence and accomplishment matter more. The Sultan has access to whatever physical beauty he desires. What distinguishes a woman who rises in the harem is wit, charm, musical talent, strategic thinking. The hierarchy within the harem is rigid and complex. At its apex sits the Valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, the Sultan's mother if she lives, or occasionally his grandmother or most senior consort. She is the most powerful woman in the empire, possibly the most powerful woman in the world at this moment. She controls the harem's budget, substantial sums drawn from the imperial treasury. She influences appointments to positions within the palace. She advises her son on matters of state. She receives ambassadors, corresponds with foreign rulers, intervenes in political disputes. Her apartments are the most luxurious in the harem, rivaling the Sultan's own chambers. Below the Valide Sultan are the Sultan's consorts. The Ottoman system does not include formal marriage in the European sense, at least not during the height of the empire. The Sultan takes concubines, and if a concubine bears him a son, her status rises dramatically. She becomes a Haseki Sultan, a favored concubine, receiving her own apartments, her own slaves, an increased stipend. The mother of the Sultan's firstborn son holds particular status, as her child is likely to inherit the throne. The mothers of princes wield influence through their sons. They educate them, advise them, build networks of support for them. When a prince is sent to govern a province, standard practice to give heirs administrative experience, his mother often accompanies him, effectively ruling alongside him or even in his name if he is young. These women become political actors in their own right, forming alliances, distributing patronage, preparing for the day their son might become sultan. Below the consorts are the Gediklis, the women of the harem, who have completed their training and hold official positions. They include the Hazinedar Usta, the keeper of the treasury, who manages the harem's finances. There is the Chamasir Usta, responsible for the laundry, a position less menial than it sounds, given the elaborate wardrobes and the symbolic importance of cleanliness. There are women who manage the kitchens, the baths, the apartments, each with their spheres of authority and their subordinates. Then come the Kalfas, women who have completed basic training and serve more senior women. They are attendants, companions, ladies-in-waiting. They might read aloud, play music, help with dressing, run errands within the harem. This is a position of trust and potential advancement. A clever Kalfa who gains her mistress's favor might rise to more important positions. At the bottom are the Asimis, the novices, girls newly arrived in the harem who must learn its ways. They are perhaps 12 or 14 years old, frightened and disoriented in this alien environment. They speak little or no Turkish. They have been taken from their families, whether through capture, purchase, or gift. Their future is entirely uncertain. They might rise to become mothers of sultans. They might spend their lives in service positions. They might eventually be married off to Ottoman officials, a common fate for harem women who do not catch the sultan's eye. The education these girls receive is comprehensive and deliberate. They are taught Turkish, the language of the court, through constant immersion. They learn to read and write, literacy being valued even in women. They learn music, to play the oud, a lute-like instrument, to sing classical Ottoman poetry set to complex melodic modes. They learn dance, not the sensual performances of Western imagination, but stylized, formal movements performed for female audiences. They learn needlework, creating the elaborate embroidery that decorates clothing and furnishings. This is more than mere busy work. It is a meditative practice, requiring patience and precision, qualities valued in the harem's hierarchical environment. The finest needlework might be gifted to the sultan or high officials, carrying political meaning through its beauty and the labor it represents. They learn court etiquette, the intricate protocols that govern every interaction, how to greet different ranks of women, how to serve coffee or sherbet, how to walk, speak, gesture appropriately, how to behave in the presence of the sultan should they be fortunate enough to enter that presence. These lessons are taught by older women, the ustas, who observe everything and correct every mistake. The education is rigorous but not harsh. Physical punishment is rare. Disapproval and the threat of demotion are sufficient motivators. They learn, gradually and carefully, about palace politics. They observe the alliances and rivalries among the senior women. They learn which families outside the palace are powerful, which officials are favored, which provincial governors are rising or falling. This knowledge is currency. A clever girl learns to collect information, to understand the larger patterns, to position herself advantageously. The daily routine provides structure to life within these walls. The women rise with the dawn call to prayer, though as Muslims, they are not required to pray in congregation like men. They perform their ablutions and prayers privately. Breakfast is served in apartments or courtyards, bread, cheese, olives, honey, fruit, tea, or coffee. The food is good, plentiful, prepared by palace kitchens that serve nothing substandard. Mornings are for lessons and work. The younger women attend instruction, while senior women manage their households, receive reports from subordinates, conduct the business of their positions. The harem is not a place of idleness. It is a functioning institution with complex administration. Budgets must be balanced, supplies ordered, disputes mediated, positions filled, punishments assigned for infractions. The baths are a central feature of daily life. The harem contains elaborate hammams, bath complexes with hot rooms, cool rooms, and washing chambers. Women bathe frequently, often daily, a level of hygiene far exceeding European norms of the period. The baths are social spaces where women of different ranks mingle more freely. Here, away from the formal hierarchies of the courtyards and apartments, information flows, alliances form, and gossip spreads. A woman scrubbing another's back might whisper news from outside the harem, brought by a eunuch or gleaned from a visiting official. These whispers shape decisions, influence actions, move the subtle machinery of palace politics. Afternoons might bring visits between apartments. The higher-ranking women hold something like salons, receiving other women for conversation, music, sweets, and coffee. These gatherings are carefully choreographed social events where status is performed and reinforced. The arrangement of cushions, the quality of refreshments, the length of visits, all carry meaning. A woman rising in favor will find her afternoon gatherings well attended. A woman falling from grace will notice absences, perfunctory visits, a general cooling of attention. The evenings belong to the Sultan, potentially. When he wishes female company, a eunuch conveys the message to the chosen woman. She is prepared by attendants, bathed again, dressed in her finest clothing, perfumed, her hair arranged. She is conducted through corridors to the Sultan's chambers. What occurs there is private, though the results may be public if pregnancy follows. The woman returns to the harem afterward, her status potentially altered by that night's events. But the Sultan does not visit every night, or even frequently. He has other concerns, affairs of state, military campaigns, religious observances. Most nights, the harem is a world unto itself, the women occupying themselves with their own pursuits. They read, they sew, they play games, they converse, they practice calligraphy or music, they care for children, as the harem houses the young princes and princesses until boys reach a certain age and are transferred to male tutors. The eunuchs who guard and serve the harem are themselves a distinct population. These are men who have been castrated, either before puberty or after, and assigned to palace service. The practice strikes modern sensibilities as barbaric, and it was brutal. Many did not survive the operation. Those who did faced lives of physical discomfort and social ambiguity, neither fully male nor female in the social order's eyes. Yet within the palace system, eunuchs occupied positions of considerable power. The Kislar Agassi, the chief black eunuch who oversaw the harem, was one of the most powerful officials in the empire. He controlled access to the Sultan's private quarters. He conveyed messages between the Sultan and the harem women. He managed enormous budgets and extensive estates that funded the harem's operations. He could influence appointments and policy. Black eunuchs, usually of African origin, held the highest positions, while white eunuchs, often from the Balkans or Caucasus, held somewhat lower roles. The eunuchs' intermediate position allowed them to move between the male and female worlds of the palace. They could enter the harem freely, but also participate in the Sultan's councils. They served as intermediaries, carrying information and influence in both directions. A clever eunuch could amass wealth and power by carefully managing these flows of information and access. The architecture of the harem reflects its social complexities. The buildings are arranged to create privacy and separation. The Valide Sultan's apartments occupy the choicest location, with windows overlooking gardens and the Bosphorus beyond. Her rooms are spacious, with high ceilings decorated with intricate paintwork and gilding. A marble fireplace provides heat in winter. Cushions and low divans offer seating in the Ottoman style. Cabinets inlaid with ivory and tortoiseshell hold her possessions. The effect is one of restrained magnificence, luxurious but not ostentatious. The consort's apartments are smaller but still impressive. Each woman's status is reflected in her allocation of space and the quality of her furnishings. A favored consort might have several rooms, a bedchamber, a receiving room, quarters for her servants. A less favored woman makes do with a single room shared with attendants. The power wielded from within these walls is difficult for outsiders to grasp. It is not formal, institutional power. Women hold no official government positions, command no armies, issue no edicts. Yet they shape the empire through influence, through the access they have to the Sultan's ear, through the sons they raise who will one day rule. The Valid Sultan's influence is most obvious and substantial. She attends meetings of the Divan when she chooses, hidden behind a screen but listening to all deliberations. She receives reports from the Grand Vizier. She corresponds with provincial governors and foreign ambassadors. When her son is away on campaign, she may effectively govern in his absence. The politics of the empire flow through her apartments as surely as through the Sultan's council chambers. But other women also exercise power in subtler ways. A favored consort might request the Sultan's intervention in a dispute, the appointment of a particular official, the grant of a favor to a family or a province. These requests, made in private, intimate moments, often carry more weight than formal petitions. The Sultan knows his consort has no motive but his welfare and pleasure. The advice comes wrapped in affection, free from the self-interest that taints official counsel. The mothers of princes build their own power networks in preparation for succession struggles. Ottoman succession follows no fixed rule of primogeniture. Any of the Sultan's sons might potentially inherit, creating fierce competition. When a sultan dies, the princes and their factions scramble for position. The prince who reaches Istanbul first, who has secured the Janissaries' support, who has eliminated rival brothers, he becomes the next sultan. In these struggles, the princes' mothers are primary strategists, using networks built over decades, calling in favors, distributing bribes, coordinating movements. This system produces capable rulers, but at a terrible human cost. The practice of fratricide, the new sultan executing his brothers to prevent civil war, becomes semi-official policy in the 15th and 16th centuries. Mothers watch their sons murdered, or watch their son order the murder of his brothers. The harem, for all its luxury and power, harbors grief and trauma alongside its intrigues. Later reforms end the practice of fratricide, but introduce new cruelties. Princes are confined to the cafes, the cage, a luxurious prison within the palace where they live in isolation, sometimes for decades, until their turn comes to rule, or until they die in confinement. The psychological toll of years in the cage produces sultans who are often unstable, unprepared for rule, damaged by their imprisonment. The harem women navigate these tragedies as best they can. They form alliances that cross the lines of competition. They support each other's children when their own prospects are dim. They create beauty and culture and learning in the midst of political ruthlessness. They are products of their time and place, exercising what agency they can within constraints we can barely imagine. The Western imagination has long fantasized about the Ottoman harem, projecting onto it various exotic and erotic scenarios. These fantasies tell us more about Western anxieties and desires than about historical reality. The actual harem was not a pleasure palace or a prison of sensuality. It was a complex social institution, combining elements of royal household, political training ground, women's college, and family home. It was oppressive by modern standards, certainly. The women had not chosen this life, and their options were limited by gender and status. But it was also a space of female solidarity, education, and sophisticated political maneuvering. As the Ottoman Empire declined in the 18th and 19th centuries, the harem's power declined as well. Reforms intended to modernize the state gradually reduced the influence of palace women. The sultans moved to more European-style palaces along the Bosphorus, leaving Topkapi and its ancient harem behind. By the early 20th century, the harem had become almost vestigial, and with the empire's collapse in 1922 and the establishment of the Turkish Republic, it ceased to exist entirely. Today, visitors walk through the harem's empty rooms, their tiles still brilliant, their fountains still playing. The spaces that once held 1,000 women now echo with tour groups' voices. The political intrigues that once unfolded here are matters for historians. The grief and ambition, the alliances and betrayals, the love and loss, all of it has faded into the past, leaving only beautiful architecture and incomplete records. As you rest now, consider those women who lived behind silk curtains, who shaped empires without ever commanding armies, who raised sons knowing some would die by their brothers' hands. Consider the eunuchs who guarded and served them, their own lives sacrificed to palace service. Consider the complex web of power, formal and informal, visible and hidden, that governed this strange and remarkable institution. Let the harem's mysteries remain mysteries. Let its corridors be empty. Let the women who once walked there rest in whatever peace history allows. Their world is gone, transformed beyond recognition. The walls still stand, but the life within them has departed, leaving only shadows and stories and the faint scent of roses in rooms no one inhabits. Imagine yourself standing at the threshold of your village home in the early morning darkness. You are 32 years old, though some days you feel much older. The oil lamp flickers behind you, casting long shadows across the earthen floor, where you have spent the last 20 years of your life bent over texts, your father's meager savings converted into ink, paper, and the patient instruction of the retired scholar who lives 3 villages away. Your mother wraps rice cakes in cloth. Her hands shake slightly. She knows, as you know, that this journey may be the last time your family invests in this dream. Your younger brother needs a wife. Your sister's children need food. The small plot of land your family farms cannot sustain another year of your absence from the fields during planting season. The imperial examination. The words carry weight beyond their simple meaning. They represent the single pathway by which a man of common birth might elevate himself, might transform his descendants into something greater, might escape the endless cycle of planting and harvest, tax and toil. The system, established and refined during the Sui and Tang dynasties, promised that merit alone could raise a man to the heights of bureaucratic power. In practice, of course, the reality proved far more complex. You begin walking toward the prefectural capital in the grey light before dawn. The journey will take you 6 days on foot. You cannot afford a horse, cannot afford a donkey, cannot even afford passage on a merchant's cart. Your worn shoes, carefully repaired the previous evening, must carry you nearly 200 li across terrain that shifts from flat farmland to rolling hills, across rivers swollen with spring melt, past villages where dogs bark at strangers, and where you must carefully ration your small supply of copper cash. The weight on your back consists of a bedroll, a change of clothes, a small bag of dried provisions, and most importantly, your examination materials. Brushes carefully wrapped in silk cloth, an inkstone, a precious bar of ink. These simple tools represent more than mere writing implements. They are the instruments through which you must demonstrate that every hour spent memorizing the 5 classics, every dawn rising to recite passages, every evening straining your eyes by lamplight has been worthwhile. As you walk, you recite. The words flow automatically now, carved into your memory through endless repetition. The Analects of Confucius, the Book of Mencius, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Great Learning. These texts, along with the Book of Changes, the Book of Documents, the Book of Poetry, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals, form the foundation of the examination. But merely knowing them proves insufficient. You must know them perfectly. You must be able to quote any passage, identify any phrase, elaborate upon any principle. The road stretches ahead, dusty and rutted by cartwheels. Other travelers pass, merchants driving goods to market, officials in sedan chairs, soldiers marching in formation. Some are also examination candidates. You recognize them by their similar burden of materials, by the way their lips move silently as they walk, reviewing, rehearsing, preparing. On the second day, your feet begin to blister. The pain builds gradually, a hot sensation with each step that eventually becomes a constant throbbing ache. You wrap strips of cloth around the wounds each evening. Wince as you pull off shoes that have adhered slightly to torn skin. Still you walk, you recite. The passages must be perfect. Even a single character written incorrectly could mean failure. Even a slight deviation from orthodox interpretation could doom your chances. You spend nights in wayside inns when you can afford them, in temple courtyards when you cannot. Other candidates gather, and the conversations follow predictable patterns. Which examiners have been appointed this year? What styles of essay composition do they favor? Has anyone heard rumors about the examination topics? The anxiety runs underneath every word, unspoken but shared. Each of you knows the statistics. Thousands will sit for the prefectural examination. Perhaps 100 will pass to the metropolitan level. Of those, perhaps 10 will ultimately receive appointments. On the fourth day, you encounter a man returning from the capital. He is perhaps 40 years old, his clothes worn, his face bearing the particular expression of someone whose hopes have been comprehensively destroyed. This was his 7th attempt at the metropolitan examination. He failed again. He tells you this matter-of-factly, without emotion, but you see how his hands tremble as he adjusts his bundle. 7 journeys. 7 failures, 14 years of returning to his village empty-handed, each time watching as his family's respect diminishes slightly, as neighbors whisper, as opportunities close. You do not ask if he will try again. The question seems cruel. Instead, you share your rice cakes with him, and he shares his knowledge. The examination cells are smaller than you imagine, he says. The nights are cold, even in summer. Bring extra ink. The guards are strict about timing. After he departs, you walk more slowly. The weight on your back seems heavier, but you continue reciting. What choice exists but to continue? The prefectural capital appears on the horizon during the afternoon of the 6th day. The walls rise higher than any structure in your home village, grey stone, topped with watchful guards. The city gates stand open, and the flow of humanity passing through seems endless. Farmers bringing vegetables, merchants with their goods, officials on business, families visiting relatives, monks seeking donations, soldiers maintaining order, and everywhere, other examination candidates. You find lodging in a cramped room you share with 3 other men. The cost consumes much of your remaining cash. The landlady provides thin rice gruel in the morning and evening, nothing more. The 4 of you barely speak. Each is lost in his own review, his own anxiety, his own desperate hope. The examination begins in 3 days. You use this time to review, to write practice essays, to ensure your materials are prepared. Your hands cramp from holding the brush, your eyes ache from reading. At night, you lie awake, listening to the city sounds. Dogs barking, night soil collectors making their rounds, the occasional shout of guards challenging someone after curfew. The morning of the examination arrives before you feel ready, though you wonder if anyone ever feels truly prepared. You rise before dawn, eat a small meal, though your stomach churns with nervousness, and gather your materials. The examination grounds lie in the government district, a vast compound of small cells arranged in rows. The crowd of candidates numbers in the hundreds. You shuffle forward in line, each man checked by guards who verify identity documents, inspect examination materials for hidden notes or texts. They are thorough. They confiscate items from several candidates. A man ahead of you loses a small book sewn into his sleeve, is immediately disqualified and escorted away in disgrace. Finally, you enter your assigned cell. The reality exceeds the warnings you received. The space measures perhaps 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, barely larger than a coffin stood on end. Brick walls rise on 3 sides. A wooden plank serves as both seat and writing surface. A small shelf above provides space for your materials. Behind the plank sits a large ceramic jar, your chamber pot for the next 3 days. 3 days. You will remain in this cell for 3 complete days and nights. Guards will patrol constantly to prevent cheating, prevent communication, prevent any contact with the outside world. Food will be passed through twice daily, thin rice gruel, vegetables, occasionally a small piece of preserved meat. Water comes in a rough ceramic cup, tepid and tasting of clay. The examination papers arrive, distributed by officials who move down the rows calling out names. The first topic appears before you, written in elegant calligraphy at the top of the page. You must compose an essay on a passage from the Analects. The format required is the 8-legged essay, a rigidly structured composition consisting of 8 specific sections, each serving a precise rhetorical function: opening, amplification, preliminary exposition, initial argument, central argument, final argument, middle leg, and conclusion. Each section must flow seamlessly into the next. Each must demonstrate not merely knowledge, but sophisticated understanding, elegant prose style, moral insight, and orthodox interpretation. You prepare your ink, grinding the stick against the stone, adding drops of water until the consistency seems correct. Too thin and the characters will blur. Too thick and the brush will drag. You dip your brush, hold it at the proper angle and begin. The first strokes must be perfect. The examiners will judge not only content, but calligraphy. Each character must be formed correctly, balanced, aesthetically pleasing. There is no erasing, no correcting. An error means starting over on a new sheet of paper. You have limited paper. Each sheet is precious. Hours pass. The morning light, filtering through the narrow opening above your cell, shifts slowly across the brick wall. Your back begins to ache from hunching over the writing surface. Your hand cramps. You flex your fingers. Prepare more ink. Continue writing. Around you, the sounds of hundreds of men engaged in the same struggle create a peculiar symphony. The scratch of brushes on paper, occasional sighs, the rustle of robes as someone shifts position, coughs, the footsteps of guards patrolling the rows. Once you hear someone vomiting, the splash of sickness into a chamber pot, the smell drifting on the air. The first essay takes you most of the day. You revise mentally as you write, crafting each sentence carefully, ensuring that every classical allusion is appropriate, every argument proceeds logically, every word reflects the moral principles expected. When finished, you set it aside carefully and begin the second topic, a poem in regulated verse. The poem must follow strict rules, 5 or 7 characters per line, precise tonal patterns, parallel structures. The topic given requires you to write about governance and virtue, to demonstrate through imagery and metaphor your understanding of proper administrative principles. You compose several versions in your mind before committing ink to paper. Night falls. The compound grows dark except for small oil lamps provided to each cell. The flame flickers, gutters, creates shadows that dance across your paper. The temperature drops. You pull your thin robe tighter and continue writing. Sleep seems impossible, yet eventually exhaustion claims you for brief intervals. You wake with your cheek pressed against the writing surface, paper stuck slightly to your skin from sweat, and return to work. The second day brings the same routine, more essay topics, more poems. Your hand moves automatically now, the characters flowing onto paper while your mind struggles to maintain focus. The food arrives at midday. Cold rice, a few vegetables, weak tea. You eat quickly and return to writing. The chamber pot in the corner fills. The smell becomes part of the environment, something you no longer truly notice, though it never entirely fades. Other candidates struggle more visibly. Through the narrow gaps between cells, you occasionally glimpse someone with their head in their hands. Someone else weeps quietly. A few cells down, a man begins shouting that he cannot continue, that he must leave. Please, he must leave. The guards arrive and escort him out. His examination is over. His years of preparation end in this moment of psychological collapse. You think of your family, your mother wrapping rice cakes, your father's hopes, never spoken but always present, your younger brother who sacrificed his own education so you might continue, your sister's children who deserve to eat better than they do. You think of these things and you write. The third day proves the hardest. Your body aches everywhere, your eyes burn from strain and lack of sleep. Your hand cramps so severely that you must stop frequently to massage the muscles. The final examination topics arrive. Questions requiring you to elaborate on principles of ritual propriety, to discuss the proper relationship between ruler and minister, to demonstrate your grasp of historical precedent. You write through the pain, you write through the exhaustion, you write because abandoning now would render meaningless everything that came before. The 20 years of study, the family's sacrifice, the journey here, the cost and discomfort of these 3 days. Finally, mercifully, the examination period ends. Officials collect the papers, checking that each candidate's name seal is properly affixed. You emerge from your cell into late afternoon sunlight, blinking, stumbling slightly on legs that have remained cramped for days. Around you, hundreds of other candidates exit their cells with similar expressions of dazed relief. The walk back to your lodging passes in a blur. You collapse onto your sleeping mat and lose consciousness immediately, sleeping for nearly 14 hours straight. When you wake, your body protests every movement, but worse than the physical discomfort is the mental replaying of the examination. Did you write that phrase correctly? Was your interpretation sufficiently orthodox? Did the poetry scan properly? The results will be posted in 2 weeks. Until then, you wait. Some candidates remain in the capital, spending their dwindling money on lodging and food. Others return home, unwilling or unable to afford the extended stay. You fall somewhere between these extremes. You wait for 1 week, then begin the journey home when your funds run too low. The return journey feels longer than the initial trip. Each step carries you further from the place where your fate is being decided by examiners you will never meet. Men who will judge your papers alongside hundreds of others, searching for reasons to disqualify, to eliminate, to reduce the number of passing candidates to the small quota allocated. You arrive home to find your family cautiously optimistic. They treat you with respect, bring you better food, give you time to rest. You appreciate their kindness while knowing it may be premature. The results will arrive in approximately 1 month, delivered by an official courier who will post the list of successful candidates at the village magistrate's office. The waiting proves almost worse than the examination itself. You attempt to return to normal life, to help with planting, to contribute to the household work. But your mind constantly circles back to those 3 days in that cell, to each character you wrote, to each phrase you selected, searching for errors, for weaknesses, for reasons you might have failed. Other villages have sent candidates to the examination. News travels slowly through unofficial channels. 10 days after your return, word arrives that someone from a neighboring village passed. The entire community celebrates. His family's fortunes are transformed. Within months, he will receive an official appointment, begin drawing a salary, gain the social status that accompanies bureaucratic rank. 3 weeks pass. 4 weeks. Finally, on a market day when the village is relatively crowded, the courier arrives. A small crowd gathers as the magistrate's assistant posts the list. You push forward, your heart hammering, scan the names written in neat columns. Your name is not there. The disappointment arrives not as a sudden blow, but as a gradual draining of hope. You read the list 3 times, as though your name might somehow appear if you look carefully enough. It does not. Of the several hundred candidates from your prefecture, 29 have passed. You are not among them. The walk home feels heavy. Your mother sees your face and knows immediately. She says nothing, simply begins preparing the evening meal. Your father nods once, accepting the news with the stoicism that characterizes his entire life. Your brother looks relieved. Perhaps now you will contribute more fully to the farm work. That night, lying on your mat, you consider your options. You could take the examination again next year. Many candidates attempt multiple times, some continue for decades. But you are 32 years old. Your family cannot afford another year of your limited contribution to the household labor. Your younger brother must marry. The land needs work. You could abandon the dream, accept that you are not destined for official service, that your years of study represent a failed investment. This path offers the mercy of closure, the possibility of finding contentment in a humbler life. But it also means accepting that you will never be more than what you are now, that your children will face the same limited prospects you faced, that the small chance of elevation your family possessed has been spent and lost. Or you could try one more time. Save money for another year, study more carefully, refine your essay composition. Hope that the next examination will find you better prepared, the examiners more favorable, the topics more suited to your particular knowledge. The decision does not need to be made tonight. But lying there in the darkness, reviewing those 3 days in the examination cell, recalling the crushing atmosphere of desperate hope, remembering the smell and discomfort and psychological pressure, you wonder if you possess the strength to endure it again. This is what it meant to be an examination candidate in Tang Dynasty China, to stake everything on a system that promised opportunity but delivered it to only a tiny fraction of aspirants, to invest years of life in pursuit of success that remained forever uncertain, to endure conditions designed to test not merely knowledge but physical and mental endurance, to risk the humiliation of failure in service of the remote possibility of elevation. The examination system would persist in various forms for more than 1,000 years, shaping Chinese society, creating a class of scholars who achieved status through merit rather than birth, establishing education as a central value. But for every success story, for every poor scholar who passed and rose to prominence, hundreds or thousands failed. They returned to their villages, their families, their fields, carrying with them the knowledge of what they had attempted and the weight of knowing they had been found insufficient. You close your eyes and try to sleep. Tomorrow, life continues. The land must be worked. Decisions must be made. But tonight, in the darkness, you allow yourself to mourn the loss of a dream that consumed 20 years of your life and ended in a small brick cell in the prefectural capital, where you wrote perfect characters onto paper that examiners judged and found wanting. The rhythm of rural life will reclaim you, as it reclaims so many. The classics you memorized will fade slightly with time, though you will never forget them entirely. And perhaps, on certain evenings when the work is done and the family has eaten, you will sit and recall passages from the Analects, taste again the bitter disappointment of that posted list. Remember when you believed that merit and effort might be enough. Let us shift our focus now, from the individual struggle of the examination candidate to the collective trauma that reshaped an empire. The year is 755 CE, and the Tang dynasty stands at the height of its power. The capital city of Chang'an glitters with wealth accumulated through centuries of Silk Road trade. The imperial court hosts poets and artists whose works will be celebrated for millennia. The bureaucracy administers the most sophisticated government the world has yet known. And in the northern frontier, a general named An Lushan prepares to tear it all apart. Imagine yourself as a minor official in Chang'an during the autumn of 755. Your days follow comfortable patterns established over years of service. Morning audiences at the ministry where you work. Afternoon reviews of documents and petitions. Evening gatherings with fellow officials, composing poetry over cups of wine, discussing literature and philosophy. The empire feels eternal, unchanging, as though the mandate of heaven has settled permanently upon the Tang ruling house. The news arrives gradually, in fragments that seem at first too improbable to credit. And Lushan, the military governor of 3 northeastern provinces, has declared himself emperor of a new dynasty. His armies march southward. Cities fall before them. The impossible is happening, rebellion on a scale not seen in generations. To understand how the empire arrived at this catastrophe, we must step backward in time and examine the rise of An-Lushan himself. Born around 703 CE to a Sogdian father and Turkic mother along the northwestern frontier, An-Lushan embodied the cosmopolitan character of Tang Dynasty China. The empire's borders stretched far beyond the traditional Han Chinese heartland, incorporating diverse peoples and cultures into an administrative structure that in theory valued merit over ethnicity. An-Lushan proved himself an exceptionally capable military commander. He rose through the ranks, defending the northern frontier against nomadic incursions, demonstrating both tactical skill and the ability to maintain the loyalty of his troops. By the 740s, he held the position of military governor, Jiadushi, over multiple provinces, commanding armies that numbered in the tens of thousands. The Jiadushi system represented one of the Tang dynasty's most significant administrative innovations and ultimately one of its greatest vulnerabilities. These military governors controlled border regions, commanded large armies, collected their own taxes, and exercised considerable autonomy. The system worked effectively when the central government remained strong and governors remained loyal. But it created the potential for regional warlords to challenge imperial authority. An-Lushan cultivated relationships at the imperial court with careful calculation. He became particularly close to Yang Guifei, the emperor's beloved consort, addressing her as his adoptive mother in an elaborate ceremony that granted him access to the inner circles of palace life. Emperor Xuanzong, aged and increasingly focused on personal pleasure rather than governance, viewed An-Lushan with favor, seeing him as a loyal, if somewhat uncouth frontier general whose military prowess secured the empire's borders. Behind the facade of loyalty, An-Lushan accumulated power. He stationed troops in strategic locations. He stored weapons and provisions. He cultivated relationships with other military governors and court officials. And in November of 755 CE, citing the corrupt influence of Imperial Minister Yang Guozhong as justification, he launched his rebellion. The initial campaign proceeded with shocking speed. An-Lushan's armies swept southward, encountering minimal resistance. The frontier forces loyal to him numbered perhaps 150,000 men. Hardened soldiers experienced in border warfare, well-equipped and highly motivated by promises of plunder and advancement. The imperial forces sent to oppose them proved inadequate. Many were garrison troops who had never seen real combat. Others were recent conscripts, farmers pulled from their fields and given minimal training. The rebel army captured Luoyang, the eastern capital, in January of 756, and Lushan declared himself emperor of the great Yan dynasty. The symbolism carried weight. Luoyang had served as capital to multiple dynasties before the Tang. By establishing himself there, An-Lushan asserted not merely rebellion, but the founding of a new legitimate dynasty that would supplant the Tang. News of Luoyang's fall reached Chang'an like a thunderclap. The mood in the capital shifted from comfortable confidence to creeping dread. Officials who had spent their careers believing in the empire's permanence now faced the reality that armies approached, that the established order might crumble, that their lives and positions depended on the outcome of battles being fought hundreds of miles away. Emperor Xuanzong, now 70 years old, struggled to respond effectively. He dismissed Yang Guozhong and other officials An-Lushan had named as justification for rebellion, but this accomplished nothing. An-Lushan's grievances were pretense, not genuine cause. The emperor ordered the mobilization of imperial forces, but assembling, training, and deploying armies required time the dynasty no longer possessed. Through the spring and summer of 756, the situation deteriorated. Rebel forces pushed westward. More cities fell. Some military governors joined the rebellion, calculating that the Tang dynasty's days were numbered. Others remained loyal, but proved unable to mount effective resistance. The professional frontier armies, loyal to An Lushan, simply outmatched the hastily assembled imperial forces. In Chang'an, the atmosphere grew increasingly desperate. Wealthy families began quietly moving valuables to safer locations. Officials whispered about what might happen if the city fell. The markets experienced periodic panics as rumors spread. The rebels were 50 miles away, they were 20 miles away, they had already crossed the river. In July of 756, as rebel forces approached the capital, Emperor Xuanzong made the decision to flee. The imperial family, accompanied by a small guard force and a handful of loyal officials, departed Chang'an before dawn, heading westward towards Sichuan province, where they might find safety. The flight proved chaotic and humiliating. The great Tang emperor, whose reign had witnessed the dynasty's golden age, reduced to a fugitive on roads clogged with other refugees. The imperial party moved slowly, burdened by elderly courtiers and the extensive household required even in flight. They subsisted on whatever food could be requisitioned from villages along the way. They slept in peasant houses and rural temples. The dignity of imperial office dissolved in the reality of displacement. At Mawei Station, about 50 miles west of Chang'an, the Imperial Guard mutinied. The soldiers, exhausted and demoralized, blamed Yang Guozhong for the rebellion and the empire's collapse. They demanded his death. The emperor, powerless to protect his minister, watched as the guards dragged Yang Guozhong away and killed him. His body was left beside the road. Then the soldiers turned their attention to Yang Guifei, the emperor's beloved consort, the woman whose beauty had been celebrated in countless poems, whose favor had influenced court politics for years, became the target of the guards' anger. They demanded her death as well, viewing her as complicit in the corruption and mismanagement that had enabled the rebellion. The scene that followed has been recorded in numerous historical accounts and poems, though the exact details remain disputed. Emperor Xuanzong pleaded for Yang Guifei's life. The guards refused to relent. Finally, understanding that the situation could escalate into wholesale violence against the imperial family, the emperor relented. Yang Guifei was taken to a small Buddhist shrine near the station. There, she was given white silk. The method of her death, whether strangling or suicide, varies in different accounts, but the outcome remained the same. When the soldiers were shown her body, they allowed the imperial party to continue westward. The emotional devastation this inflicted upon Emperor Xuanzong cannot be adequately captured in words. He was 71 years old. He had ruled for more than 4 decades. He had presided over the Tang dynasty's most glorious period. And now he fled westward as a powerless refugee, having watched his beloved consort die because he lacked the authority to protect her. Meanwhile, Chang'an fell to rebel forces. The great capital, home to more than 1 million people, came under the control of An Lushan's armies. The occupation proved relatively orderly at first. An Lushan needed the city intact and functioning if he intended to rule from it. But the psychological impact on the population was immense. The capital of the Tang dynasty, the center of Chinese civilization, had fallen to a rebel general. And Lushan did not enjoy his triumph long. In January of 757, his own son, An Qingshu, had him murdered. The rebellion lost its most capable leader, though the fighting continued. An Qingshu lacked his father's military genius and political skill, and loyalist forces began to reclaim territory. The war ground on through years of brutal campaigning. Armies crisscrossed the North China Plain, besieging cities, fighting pitched battles, devastated the countryside. The death toll mounted into the millions. Some modern estimates suggest the population of China declined by as much as 1/3 during this period, though separating deaths directly caused by warfare from those resulting from disease, famine, and disrupted agriculture proves impossible. Imagine yourself as a farmer in Henan province during these years. Your life has always followed the rhythm of agricultural seasons. Plant in spring, tend the crops through summer, harvest in autumn, survive winter, repeat. This pattern has sustained your family for generations. It represents stability, predictability, the slow accumulation of small securities. The rebellion shatters all of this. Armies pass through your region repeatedly. First rebel forces requisitioning grain, then imperial forces doing the same, then rebel forces again. They take your oxen to pull supply carts. They conscript young men from the village, including your eldest son. They strip the grain stores, leaving barely enough seed for next year's planting. The fields go partially unworked because too many men have been taken. Those who remain must work longer hours, pushing themselves beyond endurance. But still, some land lies fallow. The harvest comes in smaller than normal. The tax collectors arrive anyway, demanding their quota. You explain that the armies already took most of the grain. They respond that quotas must be met regardless. You hand over nearly everything, leaving your family to survive winter on roots, bark, and the mercy of neighbors who face identical circumstances. Disease follows the armies. Dysentery spreads through camps and villages. Typhus moves along trade routes, disrupted by war. Traditional community structures that might have mitigated these disasters have broken down. Local officials have fled or been killed. Buddhist monasteries that once provided charity have been looted. You are alone with your family, struggling to survive in a landscape where all the old certainties have dissolved. The war continues. Years pass. You lose track of which armies control which territories. It hardly matters. They all take what they need and leave devastation behind. Your eldest son never returns from conscription. You hear rumors that he died in a battle near Luoyang, or perhaps it was disease in camp, or perhaps he deserted and fled to the mountains. You will never know. He simply vanishes into the enormous casualty count of a rebellion that consumes lives by the hundreds of thousands. In 763, the rebellion finally ends, and Qingshu had been murdered by one of his own generals in 759. His successor, Shi Siming, briefly revitalized the rebel cause before being murdered by his own son, Shi Chaoyi, in 761. Loyalist forces gradually reclaimed territory. By 763, Shi Chaoyi found himself surrounded, his forces decimated, his cause hopeless. He committed suicide. The rebellion was over. But the Tang dynasty that survived bore little resemblance to the empire that had existed before 755. The central government's authority had been permanently weakened. Military governors who had remained nominally loyal during the rebellion now exercised de facto independence. They collected their own taxes, appointed their own officials, maintained their own armies, and largely ignored directives from Chang'an. The population of the empire had declined catastrophically. Modern demographic studies suggest China's population fell from approximately 60 million in 755 to perhaps 40 million by 764, a loss of 20 million people in less than a decade. Some died in battle. Many more died from disease, famine, and the disruption of agricultural systems. Entire regions were depopulated. Cities that had thrived along trade routes lay in ruins. The economic devastation proved similarly immense. The Silk Road trade that had enriched the Tang dynasty had been disrupted. Agricultural production had collapsed in many areas. The government's tax revenue had plummeted, forcing the dynasty to seek new sources of funds through salt monopolies and commercial taxes that burdened the recovery. Emperor Xuanzong never returned to active rule. He abdicated in favor of his son, who became Emperor Suzong, and lived out his final years in comfortable retirement, writing poetry that reflected on loss and impermanence. He died in 762, having witnessed the near destruction of everything he had built. The social and psychological effects rippled through Chinese society for generations. The rebellion demonstrated that the mandate of heaven could waver, that the great Tang dynasty was not immune to catastrophic failure. This shook the philosophical foundations of Chinese political thought. If merit and virtue were supposed to ensure proper governance, how had the system failed so completely? The scholar officials who survived carried trauma that influenced their work and worldview. The poetry of Du Fu, one of China's greatest poets, chronicles the rebellion's horrors with remarkable clarity. His poem, Spring Prospect, describes returning to Chang'an after its recapture. The nation is ruined, but mountains and rivers remain. This spring the city is deep in weeds and brush. Touched by the times, even flowers weep. For common people, the rebellion became a dividing line in memory, before the chaos and after the chaos. Families passed down stories of loss and survival. Villages remembered which neighbors had collaborated with rebel forces, which had remained loyal, which had simply tried to survive. The social trust necessary for community cohesion had been damaged, requiring years to rebuild. The Tang dynasty persisted for another century and a half, producing significant cultural achievements and maintaining the facade of imperial authority. But the reality was one of gradual decline. The central government never fully reasserted control over the military governors. Economic recovery proved slow and incomplete. The confidence and optimism that had characterized the early and middle Tang gave way to a more cautious, conservative approach. In 907, the Tang dynasty finally collapsed, fragmenting into competing kingdoms during the period known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. The An Lushan Rebellion, though it occurred 150 years earlier, had set in motion the forces that ultimately destroyed the dynasty. It had demonstrated the vulnerability of centralized power, emboldened regional military commanders, devastated the population and economy, and undermined faith in the imperial system. As you consider these events from your vantage point more than 1,200 years later, lying comfortably in a world where nation-states possess sufficient power to usually maintain order, where agricultural surplus is so abundant that famine has largely disappeared, where the death of millions in civil war seems almost incomprehensible, allow yourself to feel the vast distance between that world and yours. The An Lushan Rebellion represents one of history's bloodiest conflicts, yet it is relatively unknown outside East Asian history. The numbers alone, 20 million dead or displaced, exceed the casualties of many better-known wars. But beyond the statistics lie millions of individual stories. Farmers who lost their families, soldiers who died far from home, officials who watched their government collapse, refugees who fled southward seeking safety, and an elderly emperor who spent his final years haunted by the memory of his beloved consort, dying because he lacked the power to save her. The rebellion ended not with triumph, but with exhaustion. The combatants ran out of resources, soldiers, and will. The survivors returned to ruined homes and began the slow work of rebuilding. Life continued because it had to continue. Crops were planted, children were born, the rhythm of agricultural seasons reasserted itself. But the scars remained, visible in depopulated regions, in changed political structures, in poetry that spoke of loss, and in the collective memory of a golden age that ended in flame and chaos. From the vast scale of empire and rebellion, let us now turn our attention to something more intimate yet equally profound: the human desire to escape death itself. While armies marched and dynasties rose and fell, scholars in quiet laboratories pursued a different kind of power: the transformation of base matter into gold, and more importantly, the creation of an elixir that might grant eternal life. Imagine yourself in a secluded courtyard within the palace complex of Chang'an. The year is 680 CE, several decades before the rebellion we have just explored. The courtyard belongs to a Taoist alchemist named Sun Simiao. though he would also describe himself as a physician. In Chinese thought, these roles intertwined naturally. Medicine sought to prolong life and maintain health. Alchemy sought to perfect life and achieve immortality. Both pursued the same ultimate goal through different methods. The courtyard contains several structures. A main building houses texts, dried herbs, and medical instruments. A smaller workshop holds the furnaces, crucibles, and vessels necessary for alchemical work. Between them stretches a garden where medicinal plants grow in careful arrangement. Ginseng, chrysanthemum, various fungi, each cultivated for its therapeutic or transformative properties. You enter the workshop in the early morning when the air is cool and still. The interior smells of charcoal, sulfur, and something sweet and metallic that you cannot quite identify. Sunlight filters through paper windows, illuminating dust motes that drift lazily in the warm air rising from a furnace that has burned continuously for 3 days. The furnace itself is a sophisticated piece of equipment, constructed from special clay and designed to maintain precise temperatures. Within it, sealed in a ceramic vessel, a mixture of minerals undergoes transformation. The alchemist has combined cinnabar, a beautiful red mineral composed of mercury and sulfur, with various other substances according to formulas passed down through generations of practitioners. If the proportions are correct, if the heating proceeds at the proper rate, if the cosmic timing aligns favorably, the result might be a step toward the fabled elixir of immortality. To understand Chinese alchemy, one must first grasp how fundamentally it differed from the mechanical, materialist view that would later dominate Western science. In the Taoist worldview that underpinned alchemical practice, the universe consisted of qi, vital energy that flowed through all things, animate and inanimate. Minerals possessed their own form of life, growing slowly within mountains over vast spans of time. Gold represented the perfected state of metallic matter, just as the immortal represented the perfected state of human existence. The alchemist worked with these natural processes, attempting to accelerate and direct them. Just as minerals might transform into gold given sufficient time within the earth, human beings might transform into immortals given the proper substances and practices. The laboratory became a microcosm of cosmic processes, and the alchemist a participant in the fundamental workings of nature. The substances used in this pursuit possessed specific properties and symbolic meanings. Cinnabar, with its vibrant red color, was associated with blood, life force, and the sun. Mercury, which could be extracted from cinnabar through heating, was seen as a liquid metal that embodied both yin and yang, change and permanence. Gold resisted corrosion and tarnish, suggesting incorruptibility. Jade connected to purity and the earth's essence. Each ingredient contributed not merely its physical properties, but its metaphysical associations. The practical work of alchemy required patience, precision, and considerable resources. The alchemists spent hours tending furnaces, adjusting airflow, monitoring temperatures through subtle changes in flame color and sound. Substances were combined, heated, allowed to cool, separated, and recombined in complex sequences that might take months or years to complete. Detailed records documented each step, noting not only the procedures, but also the astrological configurations, weather conditions, and the practitioner's spiritual state. The most sought-after product of alchemical work was an elixir that, when consumed, would grant immortality. The exact composition varied among different traditions and practitioners, but most included cinnabar or mercury in some form. These substances, the alchemists believed, contained concentrated qi that could transform the human body, refining it from its crude mortal state into something transcendent. What the alchemists did not understand, could not understand given their conceptual framework, was that mercury and many other substances they worked with were profoundly toxic. Mercury poisoning produces a range of symptoms: tremors, insomnia, memory loss, emotional instability, kidney damage, and eventually death. But these symptoms developed gradually, and the alchemists interpreted them through their own theoretical lens. The tremors were seen as evidence of transformation, the body vibrating with newly absorbed ki. The insomnia was understood as transcendence of ordinary sleep. The emotional changes were viewed as the spirit preparing to leave behind earthly attachments. The historical record preserves numerous accounts of emperors and nobles who died from consuming alchemical preparations. Emperor Taizong of Tang, one of the dynasty's greatest rulers, died in 649 CE after consuming elixirs prepared by alchemists. Emperor Xianzong died in 820 CE from similar causes. Emperor Wuzong died in 846 CE after years of consuming alchemical preparations. The pattern repeated itself across dynasties, yet the practice persisted. Consider Emperor Xianzong more closely. By 819 CE, he had reigned for 15 years. He was 43 years old, an age when mortality becomes more than abstract concept, when the body begins to show signs of decline. He had access to the finest physicians in the empire, yet they could not prevent aging or guarantee continued health. The alchemists, however, offered something more appealing. Not merely the extension of life, but its perfection. The transformation of the mortal body into something eternal. The emperor began consuming small quantities of an elixir prepared by court alchemists. The preparation likely contained cinnabar that had been subjected to complex heating and cooling cycles mixed with gold dust, jade powder, and various medicinal plants. The taste would have been bitter, metallic, with an astringent quality that made the mouth feel dry. The alchemists instructed him to take it daily, preferably at dawn, when yang energy was ascending. For some months, the emperor may have felt positive effects. Mercury can produce initial feelings of euphoria and increased energy. The emperor might have experienced better sleep, more vivid dreams, a sense of enhanced vitality. These effects would have seemed to confirm that the elixir was working, that his body was beginning its transformation toward immortality. But mercury accumulates in the body. Over time, the toxic effects begin to manifest. The emperor's behavior grew erratic. Historical records note that he became suspicious of his officials, prone to anger, increasingly withdrawn. His hands developed a tremor. He suffered from persistent headaches and difficulty concentrating. His complexion took on a grayish cast. His kidneys began to fail, though this would not have been understood in such terms at the time. In January of 820 CE, Emperor Xianzong died. The official records attribute his death to illness, but other sources specifically mention his consumption of alchemical preparations. He was 43 years old. He had sought immortality and found instead an accelerated death, poisoned by substances his alchemists assured him would grant eternal life. The tragedy lies partly in the fact that these were not foolish men pursuing obvious impossibilities. Chinese alchemists possessed sophisticated understanding of chemical processes. They could purify substances, perform complex reactions, produce compounds with specific properties. Their work with sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal eventually led to the discovery of gunpowder, one of history's most consequential inventions. They developed techniques for porcelain manufacture, metal alloys, and pharmaceutical preparations. Their observational skills and experimental methods represented genuine scientific investigation. Yet this sophisticated chemical knowledge existed within a framework of metaphysical assumptions that led them astray. They correctly observed that substances could be transformed through heating and combination. They incorrectly concluded that this transformation could extend to human nature itself, that consuming perfected matter might perfect the consumer. The workshops where this work took place varied in size and sophistication. Court alchemists enjoyed considerable resources, elaborate furnaces, extensive collections of minerals and ingredients, assistants to tend the equipment, scribes to record procedures. They worked in dedicated buildings within palace compounds, their work sometimes supported directly from the imperial treasury. Other alchemists practiced in more modest circumstances, a small furnace in the corner of a room, a few basic ingredients purchased or gathered locally, texts copied by hand or memorized from an elderly teacher. These practitioners might be Taoist monks pursuing immortality as a spiritual path, physicians seeking to develop better medicines, or simply individuals fascinated by the transformative possibilities of matter. The process of preparing elixirs followed elaborate procedures. Cinnabar might be heated and cooled 9 times, the number 9 carrying cosmological significance. Mercury might be combined with sulfur and heated until it transformed into a black powder, then heated again until it returned to cinnabar. This cyclical transformation fascinated alchemists, who saw in it evidence that substances possessed an inherent ability to return to purified states. Gold's resistance to corruption made it valuable not merely for wealth, but for its alchemical properties. If consuming gold might make the body similarly incorruptible, then gold dissolved in mercury or ground to a fine powder and mixed with cinnabar could form the basis of an elixir. The expense of such preparations limited them largely to the wealthy, though less costly versions existed for practitioners of more modest means. The connection between alchemy and Taoism ran deep. Taoist philosophy emphasized living in harmony with nature, understanding and following the Tao, the underlying principle that gave rise to and sustained all phenomena. The legendary sage Laozi, traditional founder of Taoism, was said to have achieved immortality through alchemical practices. Many Taoist texts contained alchemical formulas alongside philosophical teachings. This split between external alchemy, Weidan, and internal alchemy, Naidan, reflected deeper questions about the nature of transformation. Could physical substances directly transform consciousness and being? Or was material transformation merely symbolic of inner spiritual work? The debate continued for centuries, with some practitioners pursuing both approaches simultaneously, others focusing exclusively on one path or the other. The search for immortality also manifested in other practices beyond alchemy. Dietary restrictions or special diets believed to promote longevity, physical exercises designed to circulate QE through the body, sexual practices intended to conserve and redirect vital essence, consumption of rare herbs, fungi, and animal products thought to possess life-extending properties. The desire to transcend death expressed itself through every available avenue. Certain mountains became associated with immortals and longevity. Mount Penglai, said to exist somewhere in the Eastern Sea, was believed to be home to immortal beings. Mount Kunlun in the west housed the Queen Mother of the West, a goddess associated with immortality. Emperors periodically sponsored expeditions to seek these places, hoping to obtain the secrets of eternal life directly from immortal sources. The social dimensions of immortality seeking created its own dynamics. Those who successfully appeared to achieve extended life gained status and authority. An alchemist who lived to advanced age while maintaining health could point to his own body as evidence that his methods worked. This created incentives for practitioners to claim ages they had not actually reached, or to attribute their longevity to alchemical practices when genetics and lifestyle might explain it more simply. The economic aspects were substantial. Rare ingredients commanded high prices. Alchemists who served at court received generous stipends. The manufacture of specialized equipment supported craftsmen. Books and manuscripts containing alchemical formulas circulated through networks of collectors and practitioners. A substantial economy developed around the pursuit of immortality, creating material interests alongside spiritual aspirations. Yet despite the deaths, despite the obvious toxicity of many preparations, the practice continued. Why? Partly because the deaths could be rationalized. Perhaps the deceased had not followed procedures correctly. Perhaps their spiritual preparation had been insufficient. Perhaps the ingredients were impure or the timing inauspicious. Each failure could be explained away, while hope persisted that the next attempt might succeed. More fundamentally, the desire to escape death proved stronger than empirical evidence. Faced with certain mortality on one hand and uncertain possibility of transcendence on the other, many chose to pursue the possibility. The alternative, accepting death as inevitable, required a different kind of courage, one that seemed to deny the very possibility of progress and transformation that alchemy represented. As the Tang dynasty declined following the An Lushan rebellion, alchemical practice continued. If anything, the period's instability may have increased interest in transcendence. When the temporal world offers uncertainty and suffering, the appeal of escaping it entirely grows stronger. Monks retreated to mountain temples to practice internal alchemy. Nobles consumed increasingly exotic and expensive preparations. The search for immortality persisted through every change of dynasty, every period of chaos and recovery. By the Song dynasty, 960–1279 CE, internal alchemy had largely supplanted external alchemy among serious Taoist practitioners. The deaths from mercury and cinnabar poisoning had become too numerous, too obvious. The theoretical framework shifted toward understanding transformation as primarily spiritual, with physical practices serving as supports rather than direct causes. But external alchemy never entirely disappeared, continuing in modified forms through subsequent centuries. The legacy of Chinese alchemy extends far beyond its failed quest for immortality. The chemical knowledge developed by alchemists contributed to medicine, metallurgy, and material science. The experimental methods they used, careful observation, precise record-keeping, systematic variation of conditions, prefigured aspects of modern scientific practice. The theoretical frameworks they developed influenced Chinese natural philosophy and cosmology. And perhaps most significantly, the alchemical pursuit raises profound questions about human nature that remain relevant. What lengths will we go to in order to escape death? How do our deepest desires shape our understanding of reality? When does hope become delusion? At what point should we accept limits rather than pursuing transcendence? These questions have no simple answers. They recur in different forms across cultures and centuries. The Tang dynasty alchemist tending his furnace, hoping that this heating cycle might finally produce the perfected elixir, differs in specifics but perhaps not in essence from modern individuals pursuing anti-aging treatments, cryonic preservation, or radical life extension through technology. The desire to transcend mortality appears to be deeply woven into human consciousness, expressing itself through whatever conceptual frameworks and technologies each era provides. As you rest now, consider the quiet workshop we began in. The furnace has burned out. The alchemist has long since turned to dust, despite all his preparations and practices. The cinnabar remains, unchanging, its red crystals as beautiful and as toxic as they were 1,200 years ago. The mountains where it formed continue their imperceptible growth. The Tao flows on, indifferent to human desires for permanence in an impermanent world. Let us conclude our journey through Tang Dynasty China by stepping into a world of privilege and refinement, a stark contrast to the struggles we have witnessed. The examination candidate endured poverty and pressure. The rebellion's victims faced violence and displacement. The alchemist pursued an impossible dream. Now imagine yourself among those for whom life in Tang China meant luxury, culture, and the leisure to cultivate aesthetic sensibility. The mansion you enter stands in the eastern quarter of Chang'an, within the prestigious Xuanyang ward. The year is 740 CE, 15 years before the rebellion that will transform everything. The family who owns this residence descends from officials who served during the dynasty's founding. Their wealth accumulated through generations of bureaucratic appointments, advantageous marriages, and careful management of agricultural estates scattered across multiple provinces. They represent the aristocratic class that formed the social and cultural elite of Tang society. You approach the entrance in the late afternoon. The exterior wall, constructed of grey brick, topped with ceramic tiles, stretches for nearly 100 meters along the street. Such walls surrounded all significant residences in Chang'an, dividing private space from public thoroughfare. The gate itself consists of heavy wooden doors lacquered in dark red, decorated with brass fixtures shaped like lion heads. 2 stone sculptures of guardian beasts flank the entrance, Qilin, mythical creatures that symbolize prosperity and protection. A servant opens the gate to admit you. You step through into a courtyard paved with flat stones, arranged in patterns that create visual interest without being ostentatious. The space serves multiple functions, receiving deliveries, providing work areas for servants, offering a transitional zone between the street's chaos and the mansion's interior serenity. Storerooms line the walls, their doors marked with characters indicating contents: grain, preserved meats, cloth, cooking oil, charcoal. A second gate leads deeper into the compound. This one, though smaller than the street entrance, is more elaborately decorated. The wooden doors feature carved panels depicting scenes from classical literature, scholars conversing beneath pine trees, immortals riding clouds, flowers and birds rendered in precise detail. Passing through this gate marks the transition from utilitarian space to living quarters. The mansion's architecture follows principles established during the Han Dynasty and refined through subsequent centuries. The buildings arrange themselves around a series of courtyards, each progressively more private as one moves deeper into the compound. The structures orient north-south according to geomantic principles, with the most important halls facing south to receive favorable qi and sunlight. The first major courtyard you enter serves as a reception area for guests and a gathering place for the family. A covered corridor runs along all 4 sides, providing sheltered walkways between buildings. The floor consists of packed earth covered with carefully fitted stones. In the courtyard center, a large ceramic vessel contains water for fire prevention and to reflect the sky, creating a sense of expanded space. The architectural style shows influences from across the Silk Road. The roof tiles display a distinctive curved profile adopted from Central Asian designs. The supporting wooden columns rest on stone bases carved with motifs that blend Chinese and Persian artistic traditions. The brackets that support the roof's overhanging eaves demonstrate sophisticated joinery, each piece fitting together without nails, capable of flexing slightly during earthquakes. The main reception hall occupies the courtyard's northern side. The building rises higher than surrounding structures, its importance marked by architectural prominence. You remove your shoes before climbing the wooden steps and entering. The interior space opens broadly, divided by movable screens rather than permanent walls. This flexibility allows the room to serve different functions: formal audiences, family gatherings, private meetings, by rearranging the screens. The furnishings reflect both traditional Chinese taste and international influences. Low platforms covered with embroidered cushions provide seating. Small lacquered tables hold tea implements and decorative objects. Bronze incense burners release fragrant smoke that drifts lazily through the space. Hanging scrolls display calligraphy by famous masters, the characters flowing with the confident ease that comes from decades of practice. Other scrolls feature paintings, misty mountain landscapes, delicate flower studies, scenes of court life rendered in mineral pigments that retain their brilliance across centuries. The family's patriarch enters from an inner chamber. He is 62 years old, a retired vice minister who served in the Board of Revenue for 3 decades. His robes are silk, dyed a deep blue-green that regulations reserve for officials of his rank. The fabric moves with a subtle sheen, catching and reflecting light with each gesture. A jade pendant hangs from his belt, its weight creating a gentle sway as he walks. His beard, now fully white, has been carefully trimmed and brushed. He greets you with formal courtesy and invites you to join the afternoon tea gathering. This daily ritual represents one of many ways the aristocracy distinguishes itself from commoners, the luxury of devoting hours to purely aesthetic and social pursuits. A servant brings tea in porcelain cups so fine that you can see your fingers through them when held up to light. The tea itself is compressed into cakes and must be ground to powder, whisked with hot water until it froths. The taste is vegetal, slightly astringent, with a sweetness that emerges as it cools. As you sip tea, other family members and guests arrive. The patriarch's eldest son serves as a district magistrate in a neighboring prefecture and is currently visiting. His wife, a woman of distinguished family from Luoyang, brings their 2 young children. The patriarch's younger son holds a position at the Imperial Academy, compiling historical texts. His sister, widowed 5 years ago, has returned to live in the family mansion along with her teenage daughter. The conversation flows through topics expected in such gatherings. Recent poetry competitions held at court, the latest fashions arriving from Central Asia along the Silk Road, news of appointments and promotions within the bureaucracy, subtle references to political tensions, spoken carefully since even private spaces might have ears. Discussion of a garden party planned for the following week when the peonies should reach their peak bloom. As evening approaches, servants light oil lamps and candles. The warm light softens the room's edges, creates shadows that move gently with each small air current. The family and guests move to the dining hall, a building adjacent to the main reception area. The space is slightly smaller, designed specifically for meals rather than formal audiences. The dining hall contains a long, low table surrounded by cushioned platforms. Everyone removes their outer robes before reclining on the cushions, which provide back support while allowing them to reach the table comfortably. This dining posture represents a relatively recent change. Earlier periods saw people sitting directly on the floor. The cushioned platform style arrived from Central Asia and gradually gained acceptance among the aristocracy before spreading more widely. The meal service demonstrates the household's wealth and cosmopolitan taste. Servants bring dishes in successive courses, each presented on fine ceramic or silver plates. The cuisine incorporates ingredients and techniques from across the Silk Road network that linked Chang'an to Central Asia, Persia, and beyond. The first course consists of cold dishes, pickled vegetables, preserved duck, thin slices of cured meat, small fish preserved in salt and spices. These serve as appetizers, awakening the palate and providing savory contrast to what follows. The pickling techniques show Persian influence, using vinegar and spices in combinations unknown in traditional Chinese cuisine. Hot dishes arrive next. A lamb stew, fragrant with cumin and coriander. Spices imported along the Silk Road and now cultivated in China by Sogdian merchants who settled in Chang'an. The cooking method involves slowly braising the meat with wine and aromatics until it becomes tender enough to break apart with chopsticks. A whole fish, steamed with ginger and scallions, represents more traditional Chinese preparation. Various vegetable dishes provide contrasts in texture and flavor. Tender greens braised in oil, crisp bamboo shoots stir-fried with mushrooms, thick slices of winter melons simmered in broth. Rice comes in a large ceramic bowl, steamed until each grain remains distinct. The variety is a fragrant long-grain type, cultivated in the Yangtze River Valley and transported to Chang'an at considerable expense. For the aristocracy, the quality and origin of rice matters as much as the dishes it accompanies. Between courses, servants pour wine into small cups. The wine is grape-based, another import from the western regions that has become fashionable among Chang'an's elite. It tastes sweeter and stronger than traditional rice wine, with fruit notes that linger on the palate. The alcohol content necessitates smaller servings and slower consumption, making it suitable for leisurely dining. Conversation during the meal touches on topics both profound and trivial. Someone mentions a new poem by the court poet Wang Wei, recently circulated in manuscript form. This leads to discussion of poetry styles, with the patriarch expressing preference for the older regulated verse forms while his younger son advocates for more experimental approaches. His sister intervenes gently, suggesting that both styles have their place, and recites from memory a poem about autumn leaves that demonstrates how traditional forms can still convey fresh observation. The meal concludes with fresh fruit. Pears, pomegranates, grapes and lychees, transported from the south at great expense, packed in ice to preserve them during the journey. Sweet pastries filled with date paste or bean paste provide a final indulgence. Tea is served again to aid digestion and cleanse the palate. As the dinner concludes, the guests depart to their own quarters within the mansion compound or return to their own residences elsewhere in the city. The immediate family members retire to different parts of the mansion for evening activities. The patriarch withdraws to his study, a small building set in a garden courtyard where he keeps his library and writing materials. He will spend the evening reading or practicing calligraphy, solitary pursuits that provide quiet contemplation after the day's social interactions. Let us follow him into this private space. The study is relatively small, perhaps 15 feet square, but every element has been chosen with care. Bookshelves line the walls, holding hundreds of texts, historical records, philosophical treatises, poetry collections, medical manuals, works on divination and astronomy. These represent a lifetime of accumulation and study. Some are rare editions, hand-copied by famous calligraphers. Others are more common works, but valued for personal associations. A teacher's gift, a friend's inscription, a volume purchased during travels. A writing desk occupies the room's center, positioned to receive light from windows that face the garden. The desk's surface holds the implements of scholarly work. Brushes of various sizes arranged in a ceramic holder, an inkstone with residual ink from earlier use, a water dropper shaped like a frog, paperweights carved from jade, a stack of practice paper made from mulberry bark. The patriarch seats himself at the desk and begins preparing ink. He pours a few drops of water onto the inkstone and begins grinding an ink stick against the stone's surface, creating a circular motion that gradually darkens the water until it reaches the proper consistency. This process requires several minutes and serves as a form of meditation, settling the mind and preparing it for creative work. Once the ink is ready, he selects a brush and begins practicing characters from a famous calligraphy master's work. He is copying the preface to the Orchid Pavilion collection by Wang Shiji, a 4th century text that is considered the pinnacle of running script style. Each character requires complete attention: the angle of the brush, the speed of the stroke, the subtle variations in pressure that give each line its distinctive quality. The patriarch has practiced calligraphy for over 50 years, yet still finds new subtleties to master in these ancient exemplars. After an hour of practice, he sets aside the brush and moves to a low seat near the window. The garden beyond is visible in the twilight, rocks arranged to suggest mountains, a small pond with lotus plants, carefully pruned trees that create the illusion of natural wilderness within this controlled space. The sound of water trickling over stones comes from a small fountain, its constant gentle music designed to soothe and center the mind. This garden represents another aspect of aristocratic life that distinguished it from common experience. The space serves no productive function. It grows no food, houses no animals, generates no income. Its entire purpose is aesthetic and contemplative. The rocks were selected from riverbeds dozens of miles away and transported at considerable expense. The trees were shaped over decades to achieve their current forms. The pond requires regular maintenance to prevent algae and maintain clear water. Servants spend hours each week weeding, pruning, and maintaining the carefully constructed appearance of effortless naturalness. Yet for the patriarch, sitting in his study looking out at this garden in the fading light, the investment justifies itself. In a world of constant social obligations, political maneuvering, and bureaucratic responsibilities, this space offers respite. Here, he can contemplate principles of harmony and balance, observe the changing seasons, find temporary escape from the temporal concerns that otherwise dominate consciousness. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, the patriarch's wife oversees the household staff as they complete evening tasks. She's 58 years old, married into this family at 16 through an arrangement between her father and the patriarch. Back when both men held mid-level bureaucratic positions, the marriage proved successful by the standards of aristocratic families: compatible temperaments, successful children, shared social status, mutual respect, if not passionate love. Her daily life consists largely of household management. She supervises approximately 30 servants who maintain the mansion, prepare meals, clean, do laundry, manage supplies, and perform countless other tasks required to sustain an aristocratic lifestyle. This supervision requires considerable skill. She must balance firmness and fairness, maintain discipline while avoiding creating resentment, ensure quality work while recognizing the servants' human limitations. The servants themselves occupy a complex social position. They are not slaves. Tang law had largely abolished slavery by this period. Rather, they are employees, contracted for specific terms or employed indefinitely at will. Some are young people from poor families who send their children to work in wealthy households for wages that support their rural relatives. Others are older individuals who have served the family for decades, effectively becoming part of the household with strong mutual obligations. The hierarchy among servants mirrors the broader social structure. Senior servants who manage specific departments, kitchen, stables, gardens, household cleaning, occupy positions of considerable responsibility and enjoy relatively high status. They eat better food, wear better clothes, and exercise authority over junior servants. At the bottom of the hierarchy work young maids and laborers who perform the hardest physical tasks for minimal wages. The patriarch's wife moves through the women's quarters, checking that everything is properly ordered for the night. The family's daughter and granddaughter occupy this section of the mansion, along with several female servants. The separation of men's and women's quarters follows Confucian propriety codes that strictly regulate interaction between sexes outside of marriage. The granddaughter, 14 years old, practices playing the pipa, a four-stringed lute that arrived in China from Central Asia and became fashionable among Tang aristocrats. The instrument requires years to master, and her playing still shows the hesitation of an advanced student. Her mother sits nearby, doing embroidery by lamplight, creating intricate patterns on silk fabric that will be made into robes or decorative panels. These refined accomplishments, music, embroidery, poetry, painting, represent essential elements of aristocratic femininity. The girl's education follows patterns established for elite women. She has learned to read classical Chinese, though not as extensively as her male cousins. She has studied the proper forms of ritual behavior, poetry composition in gentler styles, household management skills she will need when she marries and assumes responsibility for her own household. Her marriage, already being arranged through intermediaries, will ally her family with another prominent clan, strengthening social networks and political connections. As night deepens, the mansion settles into quieter rhythms. Most servants have completed their work and retired to their quarters in the outer sections of the compound. A few remain on duty, guards at the gate, someone to tend fires, someone to respond if family members require anything during the night. Oil lamps burn lower. The sounds of the city beyond the walls fade to occasional distant voices, dogs barking, the regular calls of night watchmen marking the hours. In his study, the patriarch eventually sets aside his reading and prepares for sleep. He moves to his sleeping chamber, a separate room connected to the study. The bed consists of a raised platform with silk quilts and embroidered pillows. In colder months, the platform would be heated from below using a system of flues connected to a kitchen fire, but now in summer, the natural cooling of the stone floors provides comfortable temperature. He lies down and reflects briefly on the day. Nothing extraordinary occurred, a typical day in the life of a retired official of comfortable means. Tea, conversation, a good meal, time for reading and calligraphy practice. Tomorrow will follow similar patterns, as will the day after that, as have the days for years past. This stability, this predictability, this luxury of time devoted to refinement rather than survival, defines aristocratic existence. Yet he also knows, though perhaps does not dwell on it, how precarious this comfort remains. The family's status depends on maintaining good relationships at court, on sons achieving appropriate appointments, on avoiding the political factional conflicts that periodically sweep through the bureaucracy. A scandal, a policy change, an unlucky association with someone who falls from favor, any of these could diminish their position. 15 years from now, the rebellion will destroy many families of similar standing, forcing them to flee Chang'an, lose their property, and see their carefully constructed social positions collapse. But tonight, in 740 CE, with the Tang dynasty still at its height, with the empire secure and prosperous, with Chang'an the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world, such disasters seem remote. The mansion remains solid, the gardens bloom, the wine flows at dinner, the poetry gatherings continue. The rhythm of aristocratic life proceeds as though it will last forever. In the servants' quarters, people settle onto sleeping mats laid out on the floors of shared rooms. Their day has been longer and more physically demanding. They rose before dawn to light fires, prepare breakfast, begin the endless round of cleaning and maintenance. They will rise again before dawn tomorrow to repeat these tasks. Their meals consisted of simpler fare, coarse rice, vegetables, occasional preserved fish or meat. Their entertainment consists of gossip, simple games, the occasional festival day when work obligations lighten. Yet even they benefit from the stability and prosperity of Tang dynasty at its peak. They eat regularly, they have shelter. Their wages, though modest, are paid on time. Compare this to the uncertainty of peasant life in the countryside, where one poor harvest can mean starvation, where war and taxation constantly threaten, where opportunities for advancement barely exist. Service in an aristocratic household, despite its demands, offers relative security. As you imagine yourself in this mansion, experiencing the luxury of aristocratic Tang life, notice how thoroughly different this existence is from the lives we explored earlier. The examination candidate bent over texts in desperate pursuit of advancement, the farmer watching armies destroy his livelihood, the alchemist obsessed with escaping mortality. These lives knew struggle, uncertainty, pain. The aristocratic mansion knows comfort, refinement, aesthetic pleasure. Yet all these lives existed simultaneously, in the same city, the same empire, the same historical moment. While aristocrats composed poetry in garden pavilions, candidates suffered in examination cells. While families enjoyed elaborate meals, refugees fled warfare. While the wealthy pursued immortality through expensive elixirs, The poor struggled simply to reach old age. The dramatic inequalities that characterize Tang society should not be romanticized or ignored, even as we appreciate the remarkable culture its elite classes created. The architecture, art, poetry, cuisine, and refined lifestyle of Tang aristocracy represented genuine achievements. The aesthetic sensibilities they cultivated, the classical learning they preserved, the artistic productions they patronized. These enriched Chinese civilization and influenced East Asian culture for centuries afterward. But they depended on the labor of servants, the taxes extracted from farmers, and the broader social hierarchies that concentrated wealth and leisure in the hands of a small, privileged class. As the night deepens and the mansion falls completely silent, imagine walking back through the courtyards, past the darkened buildings, toward the main gate. The stone guardian beasts remain at their posts, unchanging. The walls surround space that once held life, conversation, laughter, tears, dreams, fears, all the complex reality of human existence at a particular time and place. In the morning, the household will wake and resume its routines. Servants will light fires and prepare breakfast. The family will gather for the morning meal. The patriarch will perhaps visit friends or attend to some remaining bureaucratic matters. His sons will return to their official duties. Life will continue in its established patterns, comfortable and refined, until the rebellion 15 years hence transforms everything. But that transformation lies in the future. Tonight, in this extended present moment, we have inhabited together. The Tang dynasty aristocracy enjoys the peak of its cultural flowering, unaware of the chaos approaching, creating and preserving the artistic and intellectual achievements that will outlast the dynasty itself. We have traveled together through 4 distinct aspects of Tang dynasty life. We began with the individual, struggling against a system designed to test merit, but crushing most who attempted it. We witnessed the catastrophic violence of rebellion that killed millions and permanently weakened the empire. We explored the paradoxical sophistication and delusion of alchemists pursuing immortality through poison. We concluded in the refined luxury of aristocratic life at its cultural peak. These different perspectives reveal a complex civilization, one capable of remarkable cultural achievements and devastating violence, sophisticated learning and fatal ignorance, refined aesthetics and brutal inequalities. The Tang dynasty represents neither simple glory nor simple darkness, but the full human complexity of a particular time and place. As you rest now, more than 1,200 years after these events, consider the vast distance between that world and yours. You need not spend decades memorizing classics for one chance at examination. You need not fear armies devastating your home. You need not consume poison seeking immortality. You need not belong to a tiny aristocratic class to enjoy comfort and security. Your challenges differ from those faced by Tang dynasty inhabitants. Your world presents its own struggles and uncertainties. But lying comfortably now, in safety and peace, you can appreciate how much has changed, how many hardships you are spared, how different human existence has become. The examination candidates, the rebellion's victims, the alchemists, the aristocrats, all have long since turned to dust. Their struggles, their sufferings, their pleasures, their dreams, all have ended. The brick walls of examination cells have crumbled. The battlefields have been reclaimed by farmers. The alchemical furnaces have cooled forever. The aristocratic mansions have been rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt again through successive dynasties. What remains? The poetry they wrote, the historical records they kept, the archaeological traces of their lives, the cultural traditions they established, and the fundamental human experiences they shared with us across the centuries. Ambition, fear, hope, desire, love, loss, and the endless attempt to find meaning in temporary existence. Let these stories settle gently into your mind as sleep approaches. Allow the details to blur and fade. The examination cell dissolves. The battlefield quiets. The alchemist's workshop darkens. The aristocratic mansion becomes a shadow. What matters now is that you are here, safe, comfortable, at rest. The struggles of Tang Dynasty China belong to history. Your own struggles can wait for tomorrow. For now, simply breathe, simply rest, simply allow consciousness to drift. The past whispers its stories, then falls silent. The present moment holds you gently. Sleep comes when it comes, bringing its own peace. Rest well.